Go Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host. The y'all mean the revolution. World War III alert. China is pissed and prepares for war over the theft of its oil in Venezuela. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe. Support the platform, y'all. Well, we know it's the holidays. Y'all relax. Hope y'all enjoying y'all family. What I got here? I got some Evan Williams eggnog, original Southern. That's what I'm over here on, y'all. I don't know what y'all got. I got this good dinner over here. So I'm going to enjoy it with y'all as we get into some geopolitical information because I don't know. Oh, is it even going to be a tomorrow? I don't know, but let's look into it. What the hell is going on?
Going to get blown to pieces.
And that was Trump dropping a warning to Maduro and all of his men that they're going to get blown to pieces. So the military that's protecting the people in Venezuela tied into the same group, that's pushing drugs, even though they're more than likely two big separate units out there. Maduro's got his guys pushing stuff on boats, but then you got your regular military that runs around doing normal military stuff that's not pushing drugs, that may even have a problem with the drugs, but they got to defend the people. They got to defend the country. So now they're handing out guns and ammunition to everyday people, like going door to door, passing out weapons, getting their militias built up, and they're telling their people, get ready for a U.S. invasion. Now, Trump gave this big speech with Hegseth to one side, Rubio to the other, saying that we're going to take the ships, we're going to take them down, we're going to seize all the oil, we're going to keep the ships themselves, and we're about to start the land operations at any moment. And the way that Trump puts it, he says that the land operations are going to be way easier than the water operations. Only time will tell there, but we're seeing a huge influx of military assets rolling into the area. Like we already had a bunch, but now a bunch more are being sent in. Ospreys are being sent in, special groups, and they're just seeing a surge in a lot of stuff here. Now, the military is not going to come out and say what they're sending, who they're sending specifically. You can kind of look at from a distance and see what's flying, what's heading out of where. But when they're asked, what units are being sent here or there, they say that they do not speak on that. So they're not stating what specific troops are being sent out now, although we know special groups are already in the area. It seems like it's about that time. We've been waiting a while, and a bunch of people don't want to see it happen, period, here. But it's inevitable. It looks like it's going to happen, and nothing's going to stop it. Maduro's not leaving. That was his option. So I expect that at any time, a decapitation strike should kick the whole thing off, or at least an attempt in doing so.
No, it's not going to work.
If not, they're going to start hitting smaller targets on land. You put civilians at risk. That's a lot of blowback that they don't want. And the quickest, easiest thing for them to do is to remove Maduro, and then it's done. Then they can get an election going, and they can get whoever they want up in there and get Maduro out. But also, when they strike Maduro, you're going to see strikes on other places, other compounds, other facilities, places that are housing the drugs and chemicals to make it, or anything else they deem a threat at this point. That's just what America's going to do. Trump flexing here, and you heard it. If anyone wants to try to do anything, they're going to get blown to pieces. So
Trump ruined the rest of the little bit of credibility that he got, because sure they're going to attack. They be pretty sure they're going to attack Venezuela, but it's going to backfire. It's going to go real bad for them. And China is very pissed about the piracy of those oil tankers on the high seas. So this is what the U.S. been planning on, stealing stuff. See, this was their fallback plan. If they couldn't attack you on land, they figure they got the strongest navy other than China, and they won't be able to bully Russia. But they figured they can bully Venezuela, where you can't steal the Chinese oil that belongs to them.
2020 election. These are very specific types of fighter jets or of jets, of U.S. military jets, Air Force jets, not fighter jets per se. Their deployment is indicative of what one would see in the lead up to kinetic operations centered heavily on strikes, on targets in inland areas, such as ones the United States might carry out in Venezuela in the future. These are Growler jets. They could provide electronic warfare support for platforms launching standoff attacks or penetrating through enemy air defenses to get closer to their objectives. The jets could also help ensure the survivability of standoff munitions themselves. So these are electronic warfare jamming systems that they will utilize for land-based attacks. And to top it off, we also have this. Reuters published photos showing HC-130J Combat King 2 combat search and rescue helicopter planes and helicopters on the ramp at Roosevelt Roads at the former U.S. Navy facility in Puerto Rico. Last week, I had Professor Zhang Shuqin on my show Legitimate Targets. Go watch the episode if you haven't seen it. And he explained why he believes that there will not be an all-out war, an invasion, so to speak, of Venezuela. Now, I happen to believe that as of right now, the U.S. is in no place whatsoever to actually launch an invasion of Venezuela. I think it would make Vietnam look like a cakewalk. The U.S. has 18,000 troops in the Caribbean, and let me just tell you, that is nowhere near enough. The Venezuelan standing army right now, probably like 500,000. The Bolivarian People's Militia has like 2 million. The Venezuelan government, by the way, is just like passing out rifles to the people in working class neighborhoods left and right because they want people to be able to defend themselves if this does happen. Just like the Venezuelan military is just taking rifles to these Maduro strongholds, working class communes, and handing out rifles to everyone. So yeah, I really don't believe that a U.S. military invasion is going to do much of anything besides get a lot of Americans killed as they try to install a pro-Israel Zionist leader who wants to make gay marriage legal in Venezuela and sell off all of Venezuela's mineral resources and oil to American majority-owned transnational corporations. But I do want to discuss this because Professor Zhang Shuqin, when he was on my show, he said basically this. I do not believe that the Trump administration is serious about regime change in Venezuela, and his true purpose is to disrupt the drug trade. Well, we already know that drugs don't come from Venezuela. The U.S. intelligence agencies, the DEA, has literally admitted that, which everyone assumes is a pretext. I am convinced that Trump is intent on a third term, and so he must undermine the deep state, which he believes stole the 2020 election. The CIA controls the drug trade, and by disrupting the flow of drugs into America, will cut off the black money that powers the deep state. Well, if that's the case, he's not doing a good job because drugs don't come from Venezuela. Oil does. Now, the truth of what's going on is Venezuela has 17% of the world's oil reserves. BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and the partner members of BRICS, they control 50% of the world's oil supply, oil trade. That's a lot. And most of that is done in non-dollar denomination. So this oil trade that is led by BRICS nations is done in rupee to ruble currency settlements, or rupee to, I guess, to the Europeans. They're not BRICS, but you get the idea. It's done in petro yuan settlements. It's done in ruble settlements. It's done in rupee settlements. Venezuela, if Venezuela were to join BRICS, which it's not a member of because the U.S. blocked them from joining by using their puppet power in Venezuela in Brazil through the Brazilian Foreign Ministry. But Venezuela basically is a BRICS member. I mean, they are in effect part of the BRICS grouping, even though they're not an official member. They control 17%. So what does that mean? BRICS now controls, in effect, 67% of the world's global oil reserves. Now, all of Venezuela's oil is primarily going out in petro-yuan settlements. I think it's about 85% of Venezuela's oil is being sold and being traded in petro-yuan settlements. Now, Venezuela does not do a lot of oil exports, not a lot of oil refining, because they simply just do not have the infrastructure to do it, thanks to U.S. economic warfare that has been waged upon the country for years and years and years. But it is worth noting that if Venezuela were to obtain or were to have partners that could bring the proper processing or refining technologies to the Caribbean and then go on and export the oil across the world, the vast majority of that oil, and it is a lot, largest oil reserves in the world, would be sold in petro-yuan settlements. Donald Trump on numerous occasions has said that an attack against the dollar, or de-dollarization as it's referred to by BRICS member states, is a greater threat to the security of the United States than any invasion of the continental United States ever could be. Goes to show how important he views this, upholding the hegemonic power of the US dollar. Now, it's also worth noting that China has been more and more involved in Venezuelan oil over the past few years. In fact, in August of this year, big Chinese firm began producing oil in Venezuela under a 20-year new pact. Okay, it's over a $1 billion project to produce 60,000 barrels of oil per day of crude oil by the end of 2026, and it would increase as the years go on. As of right now, Venezuela, they produce about 1 billion barrels of oil per day. About 85 to 90% of that is controlled by Chinese firms. That's who it ends up in the hands of. It's traded by petro-yuan settlement. Okay. And that could explain why Trump just seized a Chinese tanker that was headed to China from Venezuela. Now, this is very big news. The U.S. has now intercepted 3 tankers that were doing oil trade with Venezuela, the third one being this morning. Brian Berletic posted about this and said, as I've pointed out from the beginning, the U.S. targeting Venezuela is not about retreating to the Western Hemisphere. It is entirely about removing a Russian or Chinese partner from the board, isolating both Russia and China further ahead of continued U.S. aggression worldwide. It also adds to a global maritime blockade that the U.S. is incrementally imposing both through sanctions and direct tanker seizures, as well as, for example, so Brian goes on to say, as through targeting and destroying maritime shipping through proxies, for example, using Ukrainian drones, the U.S. CIA provided to Ukraine and directs the use of. So this is really about pressuring Russia and China, targeting them, blockading them, and stripping them of their access to global waters for shipping, for vital resources, for trade of these resources, and for establishing a foothold in global oil reserves and trade in non-dollar denomination. Okay. Now, the amount of oil that the U.S. is seizing in these operations is it's not small. The first ship that the U.S. seized was worth about $60 million worth of oil. And about 10% of Venezuela's annual GDP comes from oil exports. So this, as you could imagine, will become a very big issue for the Venezuelan state, for the Venezuelan economy in the near future. Even if the U.S. does not invade, even if the U.S. does not move forward with land strikes, this is a very big issue already. All right. The U.S. has seized another ship off of Venezuela earlier this morning, and this time it was allegedly a ship flying under the flag of Guyana. Okay, but a lot of people are saying it was actually a Russian Shadow Fleet vessel. Now, the Chinese are responding to this, and they're not happy about it. As for the Chinese ship that was seized, called Centuries, it was snatched in an operation using military helicopters, which illegally landed because these Chinese vessels are not sanctioned by the U.S. government. So the U.S. government is now seizing illegally non-sanctioned vessels that were headed to Iran, non-sanctioned vessels that were carrying oil headed for China from Venezuela. The U.S. is taking a lot of very drastic measures against China, against Russia, and against Venezuela. Anyone who thinks that the U.S. is, well, we're just focused on the Western Hemisphere couldn't be further from the truth, okay? Could not be further from the truth. What you all need to understand is the U.S. is now imposing basically a total maritime blockade of Venezuela. And I say nearly total because they are still allowing other exports to go in and out of Venezuela. But as far as oil, it is a total blockade because it's not just the 6 sanctioned Venezuelan ships that the U.S. is stopping and threatening to seize. Most of the Venezuelan tankers or shadow fleet tankers that were docked on the coast of Venezuela have either turned around or have not moved an inch because they understand they are very likely to be seized by the U.S. Coast Guard. This is a very, very big issue, and it's the first time that the U.S. has imposed a blockade of this kind since 1962 during the Cuban Missile Crisis. That's the type of threat that the U.S. assesses by Russia and China having good relations with Venezuela and Venezuela doing all of this oil trades and petro-yuan settlements, non-dollar settlements, okay? They view it as a threat similar to the Soviet Union putting missiles in Cuba. That is how serious they are taking this threat. And this is where the maritime aspect of the story ends that I'm covering regarding Venezuela, because it is looking like we are headed now towards something that goes beyond maritime and toward land strikes. What could they hope to target? Well, they're going to tell you they're going to target, these Venezuelan drug manufacturing facilities, but I would not be surprised if they will be targeting oil facilities and probably also Miraflores Palace, the head of state, government offices, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Center for Economic Investment, all these places in Venezuela, right? Why do I say that? Well, for starters, we can look at this. The Department of Defense has now issued a solicitation on December 9th for an estimated $32 million one-year contract for food for U.S. military personnel in and visiting Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico, as we know, is one of the HQs for the U.S. military, for the Marine Corps, that they're using to stage operations against Venezuela. What does that mean? Well, it means that this contract for food for all of the 18,000 troops that are stationed in this region will extend into 2027 for who knows what purpose and could be renewed after that. So you're talking about long-term food contracts that are being offered now for no small, dollar amount for 18,000 troops in the Caribbean. That will extend 2027, 2028. It means this is going to be a long operation, whatever they do. But not just that. We also have this, okay? The U.S. military has now deployed EA-18Gs. These are very specific types of fighter jets or of U.S. military jets, Air Force jets, not fighter jets per se. Their deployment is indicative of what one would see in the lead up to kinetic operations centered heavily on strikes, on targets in inland areas, such as ones the United States might carry out in Venezuela in the future. These are Growler jets. They could provide electronic warfare support for platforms launching standoff attacks or penetrating through enemy air defenses to get closer to their objectives. The jets could also help ensure the survivability of standoff munitions themselves. So these are electronic warfare jamming systems that they will utilize for land-based attacks. And to top it off, we also have this. Reuters published photos showing HC-130J Combat King II combat search and rescue helicopter planes and helicopters on the ramp at Roosevelt Roads at the former U.S. Navy facility in Puerto Rico. The aircraft are stationed at Moody Air Force Base in Georgia, usually, though the helicopters reportedly arrived from deployment to Kadena Air Base in Japan. So now they have these in Puerto Rico. These are search and rescue helicopters and jets, which are used if a fighter jet were to be shot down or a pilot were to eject from their plane in hostile territory. You get what they're planning to do here, right? Search and rescue for fighter jet pilots that go down in action. long-term food contracts, electronic warfare, jamming planes, these Growler jets that they're going to deploy for land strikes. It's really not looking good. I think the writing is on the wall. And this, again, is just another war for the Epstein Wall Street regime. Before you leave, I want to say thank you for the support, because after 2 years,
file closely and thinking to yourself that this no longer feels like sanctions alone and instead feels like something sharper and far more dangerous, you are not imagining it. In just the last few days, the United States has crossed a critical threshold, moving from economic pressure and financial chokeholds into physical interdiction at sea. U.S. forces have now boarded and intercepted vessels carrying Venezuelan crude in international waters. And that is not symbolic. That is not diplomatic theater. That is the kind of action that forces recalculation in every capital that matters, from Caracas to Beijing to Moscow. Let us start with what just happened, because this is the moment where abstraction turns into action. Multiple credible outlets are now confirming that U.S. forces led by the Coast Guard, with Department of Defense backing, interdicted and boarded a Panamanian flag tanker named Centuries.
It is a sanctioned dark fleet vessel. It is part of Venezuela's illegal sanctions evasion. A tanker currently being pursued through the Caribbean Sea by the U.S. It could soon become the third seizure of a tanker. As
the U.S. is chasing another ship linked to Venezuela, escalating tensions between the two countries. ABC's Christian Cordero has the latest.
Today, the U.S. is chasing down a third vessel with ties to Venezuela in less than 2 weeks. A U.S. official tells
President Trump of trying to bring down this narco-terrorist state in Venezuela run by Maduro. They're bad news.
The ship was reportedly carrying roughly 1.8 million barrels of Venezuelan Mare crude and was allegedly headed toward China. Washington is framing this as enforcement against sanctions evasion and narco-terror financing, while Caracas is calling it outright piracy and is signaling that it intends to take the issue to the United Nations. And this is where everyone needs to slow down and actually follow the logic chain instead of the headline. Because the vessel in question was reportedly not on any formal U.S. sanctions list, and that detail matters enormously, it is precisely why legal experts and even former sanctions officials are now openly questioning the grounding. Because once you normalize stopping ships that are not explicitly designated, you are no longer just enforcing sanctions. You are drifting into de facto blockade behavior, and blockades have a long and ugly history of turning pressure into war risk. This was not a one-off incident either. Reporting suggests this is part of a broader escalatory pattern: earlier actions against another vessel, followed by a widening U.S. push to choke off Venezuela's oil export lifeline, particularly the shadow networks that move crude toward Asian buyers. The same chokehold is what YouTube has over news videos like this. So if you like the video, it would help us beat the algorithm. Subscribe if you haven't already.
South America is once again astonished by the military presence of a foreign power. The limits of international law are being tested. An armed intervention in Venezuela would be a dangerous precedent.
You see, while this is unfolding at sea, what is happening inside Venezuela itself? Economically, the pressure point has never changed. Oil revenue is oxygen. Cut it, and the entire system starts gasping.
How he gets out of it. And if he uses military force in a serious way, he's going to do a lot of damage to American foreign policy. It's not going to have a happy ending. But to take this just a step further, especially thinking that this is the holiday season, tomorrow's Christmas, you know, when we try and strangle a country like Venezuela directly and Cuba indirectly, we inflict massive punishment on the civilian population. You can rest assured that Maduro will be eating filet mignon tonight, and this is not going to affect him in any meaningful way. But the average person in Venezuela and the average person in Cuba, is going to suffer enormously as a result of these policies. And we run all around the world, and this is not peculiar to the Trump administration. We've done this in the past as well, inflicting massive punishment on the civilian populations in countries all across the planet. And in the end, I don't understand what we gain from it. So not only do we lose, but all these people lose. And it's just from, I think, a human rights point of view, and also from a strategic or realist point of view, these are policies that just don't make any sense. We ought to leave Venezuela and Cuba alone. If they do something to threaten us, okay, then we can play tough with them. But in no way is Cuba or Venezuela a threat to the United States. So why inflict massive punishment on the civilian populations in these two countries? I just don't understand it.
Here he is 2 days ago when he was asked, what are you going to do, Mr. President, with the ships you seized, talking about the tankers, and the oil that's in them? Now, before we play this clip, bear in mind, I think you know this already, Professor, the most recent seizure contained 1 million barrels or more of oil bought and paid for by the Chinese. He may be playing with fire, but watch his attitude. Chris, cut number 9.
What are we going to do with the oil that we have?
Going to do with what?
The oil that has been seized. The United States seized 1.9 million barrels of oil on December 10th.
We're going to keep it. We're keeping.
Where's it going? Are we going to sell it or put it in the strategic?
Maybe we'll sell it. Maybe we'll keep it. Maybe we'll use it in the strategic reserves. We're keeping it. We're keeping the ships also.
It's the same as the EU seizing the assets of the oligarchs, except this is an act of war, is it not?
International piracy is what the Chinese called it. As far as I can tell, they're correct. The ship, the Centuries, that had that 1.8 million gallons of oil on it that was going from Venezuela to China and was not a sanctioned ship, as best I can tell, is going to cause all sorts of problems with the Chinese. It already has. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Chinese seized a ship of ours.
China not going to put it.
The fact is, the Chinese, given the hostility between the United States and China at this point in time, the Chinese have a vested interest in retaliating, playing tit for tat. Because if they let Trump get away with doing this, Trump will just do.
Iran just seized another oil tanker today. So if Iran keeps seizing, what you think China gonna do? But China not gonna seize a tanker. They gonna hurt us financially in our economy. That oil tanker stuff, they gonna leave that for Iran.
Do more of it.
Right.
So I wouldn't be surprised if the Chinese retaliate. If I were, the national security advisor in Beijing, I'd be looking for an opportunity to do the same thing to an American ship.
Analysts cited this week have warned that these measures could sharply reduce foreign currency availability, weaken exchange rate stability, and intensify already extreme inflation dynamics. And because Venezuela is deeply import dependent, currency stress converts into price stress almost immediately. Households feel it, businesses feel it, and political tension rises quickly. But here is the frame you need to keep in your mind. This is not only about Caracas. This is about routes, Caribbean shipping lanes, refinery chains, buyer networks, and the diplomatic cover that makes any of this possible. Because once Washington begins physically interfering with the export channel, it is no longer just punishing the seller. It is forcing the buyer, especially China, to decide whether it will accept U.S. maritime policing as the new normal, and that brings us directly to the U.S. military posture in the region. This is not a couple of ships keeping an eye on trafficking. Multiple analyses now describe this as one of the largest U.S. regional deployments in the Caribbean in decades. Figures cited by major policy institutions point to roughly 15,000 U.S. personnel deployed under the banner of this operation. And that scale alone raises serious questions about whether the mission profile actually matches a narrow counter-narcotics objective, because when lethal strikes and kinetic actions become routine under broad labels like narco-terror, it becomes easier to quietly expand the target set. So ask yourself this very simple question. If the real goal is narcotics interdiction, why are oil tankers being boarded in Venezuela's orbit? This is where official narratives start to become extremely convenient. Narco trafficking is the justification that plays well domestically. Sanctions enforcement is the bureaucratic wrapper. But the strategic objective that keeps resurfacing like a watermark is political leverage over the Maduro state and, by extension, over Venezuela's oil sovereignty. Even establishment policy institutions openly acknowledge the contradiction. If Washington truly believes Maduro is illegitimate and criminal, why build a massive maritime posture only to leave him in place? That tension is exactly why so many analysts are reading these moves not as policing, but as pressure toward collapse. And whether regional leaders intensify warnings because diplomatic smoke usually comes before geopolitical fire. If you want the honest headline, this is the most dangerous phase of the Venezuela standoff in years, because the US has moved from restricting money to restricting movement, and history tells us that when movement at sea is restricted, escalation rarely remains contained. Thank you so much for watching. Support honest journalism by subscribing, and until I see you in the next
The U.S. Navy reportedly failed to seize the oil tanker Bella 1 after a chase off Venezuela's northern coast that began more than 35 hours after initial contact, and the tanker fled into the Atlantic Ocean, evading capture. If seized, the Panamanian-flagged vessel would be the third vessel the U.S. has pursued since December 10, Bloomberg reported on Sunday, December 21. Widely circulated footage shows the U.S. Coast Guard, with support from the Department of Defense in its latest operation, reboarding a giant oil tanker more than 2,000 kilometers from the U.S. mainland coast, amid heightened tensions between Washington and Caracas, in the Caribbean Sea. Bella 1, which was not escorted by the Venezuelan Navy at the time, was carrying up to 2 million barrels of Venezuelan crude, and the shipment was owned by a Chinese company, according to the report citing several sources. However, Bella 1, which had been pursued by the U.S. military for 2 days, was unboarded and successfully escaped into the Atlantic Ocean, indicating that it successfully evaded countermeasures during its journey. Bella 1 has issued repeated distress alerts, continuing its journey at an average speed of about 11 knots, following its 39-day journey from Iran to Venezuela to load oil. Although the tanker has not yet been seized, it faces another challenge. The tanker likely has enough fuel for another 28 to 35 days unless its speed slows. This is likely if the U.S. Coast Guard abandons the pursuit. Based on this, it will likely head southeast towards South Africa to reach the Middle East. This would allow it to remain unconnected to the automatic identification system. Meanwhile, Venezuela has condemned Trump's move, calling it international piracy. The U.S. Navy has now become a pirate, pursuing a third oil tanker near Venezuela, said Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. Maduro also sent a letter to the heads of Latin American and Caribbean nations, as well as to the 194 member states of the UN General Assembly, warning of state-sponsored piracy and increasing U.S. aggression. In addition, China condemned the pursuit of the oil tanker, saying that the U.S. has seriously violated international law. Chinese Foreign Ministry Wang Yi stated that the country opposes unilateral sanctions that are illegitimate and have no basis in international law or authorization from the UN Security Council, and opposes any action that violates the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, infringes on the sovereignty and security of other countries, and constitutes unilateral action and intimidation.
This story could mark a turning point in global geopolitics. Over the weekend of December 20 to 21, the United States intercepted and seized an oil tanker carrying nearly 1.8 million barrels of Venezuelan crude oil. The destination? China. The location? Off the coast of Venezuela. Washington claims the ship was part of Venezuela's so-called shadow fleet, operating under a false flag to evade U.S. sanctions on the Maduro regime. But for Beijing, this was not law enforcement. This was an act of piracy. China's foreign ministry bluntly called the seizure a serious violation of international law, accusing the United States of attacking sovereign rights and free trade. This is where the story gets dangerous, because this was not just about Venezuela. This was about China's energy security. Venezuela supplies up to 15% of China's crude oil imports, and for Beijing, interfering with that supply is a direct strategic threat. The Trump administration, meanwhile, is escalating pressure on Garacos, floating ideas of renewed sanctions, even a potential naval blockade. And now, China and Russia have both stepped in, pledging diplomatic support for Venezuela. So, the big question is this: could China take massive offense and jump into the US-Venezuela conflict? And could a direct showdown between Xi Jinping and Donald Trump push the world closer to a global war? Experts say direct military intervention by China is unlikely, but indirect involvement is very much on the table. Just look at Ukraine. The US never sent troops, but it sent money, weapons, intelligence, and diplomatic cover. China could do the same for Venezuela. Economically, Beijing could expand loans, oil for debt deals, and Belt and Road projects to keep Maduro's government afloat, despite US sanctions. Militarily, China could supply surveillance drones, defensive systems, or training support without ever putting boots on the ground. Diplomatically, China could block US moves at the UN, rally BRICS nations, and amplify anti-US narratives globally. And on energy, Beijing could help Venezuela create alternative export routes, bypassing US interdictions, challenging American control over global energy flows. So, does this lead to World War III? Most analysts say the probability remains low. Nuclear deterrence, massive US-China trade, and fear of global economic collapse all act as brakes. But here's the risk. If missteps pile up, naval standoffs, cyber retaliation, or Russia deepening its role, what started as one oil tanker could ignite a much larger confrontation. For now, this is a warning shot, not a war. But the lines are hardening, the players are positioning, and the world is watching very carefully.
For 80 years, the U.S. Navy's ultimate weapon hasn't been a carrier or a submarine. It's been the blockade, the power to slowly and quietly starve a nation into submission. Now, imagine a near-future scenario where this weapon is put to the ultimate test. It's late 2025, and a U.S. administration has ordered a total and complete naval blockade of sanctioned oil tankers moving in or out of Venezuela. Warships are massing in the Caribbean, aiming to cut the economic lifeline of a nation sitting on the world's largest oil reserves. China condemns the move, but for now, offers only words.
The U.S., he says, will actively blockade and seize vessels it had already sanctioned, a move some critics have called an act of war. Nick Schifrin starts our coverage.
In the Caribbean Sea, U.S. troops at the ready for a new mission with more targets. American-sanctioned Venezuelan oil tankers. Last night on Truth Social, President Trump promised to, quote, total and complete blockade of all sanctioned oil tankers going into and out of Venezuela.
Just a blockade. Not going to let anybody going through that shouldn't be going through.
Already last week, the Coast Guard and military boarded and seized a tanker. There are more than 30 such tankers off the Venezuelan coast, a ghost fleet of ships that Venezuela has used to evade oil sanctions. That pressures Venezuela's chief source of revenue. There are estimates that 90% of the economy is based on oil exports. U.S. officials believe challenging that weakens Maduro's grip on power and could force him to step down.
But what if China had a way to make that blockade useless? What if Beijing had a plan that didn't require a single ship, but something far more subtle? The secret might be a speculative project buried deep beneath the Venezuelan coast, a wild idea that could rewrite the rules of conflict. A project some might call the geothermal shield. To get why this hypothetical strategy is so audacious, you first have to respect the raw power of a naval blockade. It's not just about stopping ships. It's about controlling everything: food, medicine, and especially fuel. For a country like Venezuela, whose entire economy runs on oil exports, a blockade is an existential threat. In our late 2025 scenario, that threat is very real. The U.S. has deployed what it calls the largest armada ever assembled in the history of South America to surround the country. The stated goal is to halt illicit trade, but the strategic aim is clear: cut off the regime's main source of income and force a change. This isn't a new playbook. The U.S. has used blockades to project power for generations. A carrier strike group can't be everywhere, but a blockade is a persistent, suffocating pressure that few nations can withstand. It's a slow-motion siege. And against Venezuela, it would look like checkmate. With its oil tankers stuck in port, the economy would inevitably collapse. That's the conventional wisdom. But in geopolitics, conventional wisdom is often the first casualty of innovation. And according to a radical new theory, China wouldn't try to challenge this blockade on the seas. It would plan to go under it. This is where we dive into the world of strategic speculation, piecing together motive, opportunity, and technology. The concept is what we're calling the geothermal shield. It's not a missile defense system. It's a hypothetical, clandestine industrial network, powered by a nearly limitless energy source, and hidden completely out of sight. The thought experiment starts with one question: how do you make a country blockade-proof? You make it so it doesn't rely on the sea in the same way. You create a lifeline that's invisible from the air and untouchable from the surface. The key to this whole strategy is energy. A modern economy needs a massive amount of power. A blockade works by cutting off the fuel needed to generate that power. But what if a nation had its own inexhaustible power source that couldn't be sanctioned? While Venezuela is famous for oil, modeling suggests it also has immense superhot rock geothermal potential. This isn't your average hot spring. We're talking about drilling kilometers deep to access rocks heated by the Earth's core, creating superheated steam to power turbines. It's a technology that could, in theory, unlock staggering amounts of clean, 24/7 power. The theory goes that China, a global leader in massive infrastructure projects, could provide the investment and advanced drilling tech to turn this untapped potential into a strategic game changer. But this isn't just about keeping the lights on. It's about powering a hidden, parallel economy. The geothermal shield theory imagines this vast energy source wouldn't just go to the civilian grid. It would be funneled into a network of deeply buried underground facilities, turning the very ground beneath Venezuela into a strategic asset. So, how would this hypothetical geothermal shield even work? The concept balances on three pillars: unstoppable energy, hidden industry, and a powerful partnership. First, the energy. Tapping superhot rock geothermal is a monumental engineering challenge. But China, with its history of ambitious projects, might be positioned to help solve it. For years, Beijing has been deepening its all-weather strategic partnership with Venezuela, investing billions and helping to modernize its infrastructure, including the power grid and oil sector. The idea is that China could introduce next-generation drilling technologies at secure, inland locations, creating power plants immune to airstrikes and free from any external fuel supply. Second, the clandestine industry. This is the core of the strategy. This immense geothermal power would run a network of underground factories and bases, hardened against attack and invisible to spy satellites. Military history has examples of facilities like this, from Cold War command bunkers to secret submarine pens. Imagine what you could build down there. Automated 3D printing facilities could churn out spare parts for military gear or essential oil components. And here's the wildest part: subterranean submarine pens. These could allow Venezuelan or even Chinese submersibles to be serviced, armed, and deployed without ever surfacing in a blockaded port. A surface blockade becomes almost irrelevant if your most critical activity is happening 1,000 feet underground. Third, the Chinese connection. This whole project would be a masterclass in asymmetric competition. Beijing wouldn't need to match the US carrier for carrier. Instead, it would leverage its strengths in engineering and long-term planning. For China, the investment would be a strategic masterstroke, securing access to oil, gaining a powerful foothold in America's backyard, and showing the world a new way to challenge US power without firing a shot. For Venezuela, it's a lifeline. If a geothermal shield ever became operational, the consequences would be world-altering. First, the US naval blockade would become a hollow threat. The US Navy could patrol the Caribbean, but it'd be like guarding a bank's front door while thieves tunnel into the vault from below. Venezuela could theoretically continue to extract and refine its oil, and perhaps even export it via a fleet of submarines or semi-submersibles, all powered by the shield. The economic pressure, the main point of the blockade, would vanish. Second, it would transform Venezuela from a struggling state into an unsinkable partner for China, right on America's doorstep. This would be a direct challenge to the Monroe Doctrine, the principle that has guided US policy in the Western Hemisphere for 2 centuries. A Chinese-backed, blockade-proof Venezuela would signal a new era where US dominance in its own hemisphere is no longer guaranteed. Finally, it would rewrite the rules of modern conflict. For decades, power has been measured by what you can see: fleets, armies, air forces. The geothermal shield concept represents a shift toward what you can't see. It's a type of warfare where geology and engineering become more important than naval tonnage. If this model worked in Venezuela, where else could it be deployed? Any nation with the right geology and a powerful ally could theoretically build its own shield, making them incredibly resilient to traditional military pressure. This is the kind of strategic what if that will define the 21st century. The battles of tomorrow might not be fought with carrier groups, but with tunnel-boring machines and geothermal drills. If you want to keep exploring the future of geopolitics and military tech, make sure you subscribe to our channel. Of course, let's be clear. The geothermal shield remains, for now, a thought experiment. The engineering hurdles are immense, the costs would be astronomical, and the United States would undoubtedly use its own arsenal of tech, from seismic sensors to deep penetrating munitions, to neutralize such a network. But the strategic logic is hard to ignore. As global tensions rise and nations rely on their traditional tools of power, their rivals will always look for asymmetric advantages. They will play a different game, one based on patience, engineering, and three-dimensional thinking. The showdown in the Caribbean, we imagine, might not be decided by warships on the waves, but by a hidden struggle between a surface blockade and a subterranean lifeline. It raises a fascinating question for the 21st century. In a real showdown, whose strategy would prove stronger? The masters of the sea, or the new masters of the world below? Let us know what you think in the comments.
good American. In light of the 15% of the U.S. Navy hanging out around Venezuela, here's what Mike Waltz said about the justification for why we might do something.
The United States does not recognize Nicolas Maduro or his cronies as the legitimate government of Venezuela. Nicolas Maduro is a fugitive from American justice and the head of the foreign terrorist organization Cartel de los Soles. In fact, Maduro and his regime stole the election, and the international community has the receipts. President Trump has been very clear that he is going to use the full power of the United States of America, the full might of the United States, to take on and eradicate these drug cartels, which have operated with impunity in our hemisphere for far too long, and everyone knows it.
So if anybody missed it, let me just say in that one little clip there, you had, first of all, him declare that Maduro was the head of a drug cartel. He listed the name of it there. And then he said that President Trump is committed to destroying all of these cartels using the full power of the United States. Just on that right there, how do you read his comments?
Yeah, Trump thinks he can kill his way out of this, and he can't. He'll find it out the hard way. It will burn his presidency to the ground. And, it's his own damn fault. But unfortunately, there are going to be a lot of Venezuelans who'll die in the process, and a lot of American soldiers that'll die in the process. This is, George W. Bush thought he had it going when he did his mission accomplished speech, and didn't realize that the worst was yet to come. And I think Venezuela has the potential to be much worse, simply because the kind of planning you should do in terms of, okay, we're going to go in, we're going to try to take control of this country. What are we going to need to do in order to secure that? That level of planning has not been done, I'll guarantee you.
And so if it hasn't been done, and yet we have this statement here, we have 15% of the Navy, as Lindsey Graham said a couple of days ago. I wish I had pulled that soundbite up, but I forgot to grab it, where he said, listen, we got 15% of the United States Navy out there. If Maduro's still in power, and I forget whether he said some number of months from now, or he doesn't go anywhere, then Trump looks bad. And all of these guys in Russia and all these guys in China are going to be saying, oh, America doesn't mean anything. He's basically taunting Trump and saying, you better do something with all this power. But as you pointed out, there's almost no way all of the preparation that you have to do for this kind of thing could have taken place. The question is he going to?
Well, we now have at least two real world examples of Trump's use of power. And what did it accomplish? The Houthis. By God, we're not going to be wimps like those Biden people. We're going into the Red Sea. We're going to teach those Houthis a lesson. And what happened? We lasted 7 weeks. Whereas under Biden, the Houthis were shooting down an average of one Predator drone a month. Under Trump, they were shooting them down one a week. And they lost three combat aircraft in the spate of those 7 weeks. And the aircraft carrier came close to getting hit. So what did Trump do? We win. The Houthis capitulated. Let's go. We're leaving. Then we had them obliterating Iran. Iran's obliterated. Well, now Bibi Netanyahu's back saying, "Hey, can we go get them again? Because they look like they're not obliterated." So which is it? So Trump yet has a successful use of military force, and now we're watching this impotence on display again off the coast of Venezuela. Hell, put 75% of the U.S. naval assets there. Go ahead. And how does that control what's going on inside Venezuela? Yeah, you can blockade the ports. Well, there are these things called borders with Brazil and Colombia that there are lots of enterprising young men in Venezuela that say, hey, I can make a shit ton of money smuggling across the border. Voila, a new whole business enterprise is launched. We'll put our 18,000 troops in Venezuela. These, we're activating our special forces. God love the special forces. They're different from special operations forces. So God love the Green Berets. But I don't care if it's Green Berets. I don't care if it's 75th Rangers. I don't care if it's Delta Force or SEAL Team 6. They have very, very limited capabilities,
especially in the conventional realm.
Yeah. They don't do conventional well. They're designed to do unconventional, but unconventional has a very, very, very limited power.
Yeah.
And and I learned that at the feet of my two mentors. One was U.S. He was the last Army colonel to command SOCCENT, Colonel Larry Dugan, and my boss at State, Colonel Dominic Richard Aloysius Gannon, been commander of the 5th Marines, both Vietnam veterans. Dugan was part of SOG, so he'd been around special operations for all of his career. But they all reminded me what the limitations of those forces, what they can do, what they can't do. And the size of that force, if they go up against a Venezuelan guerrilla movement, an insurgency, they will be easily launched. Because again, it's 3 times the size of Vietnam. It's heavily jungled, lots of mountains, lots of territory that we can't cover. I mean, you go back and look at our time in Vietnam. We had more than 500,000 men on the ground, for God's sake.
Larry, I remember during my time in Afghanistan in the 2010 time, I went on a combat patrol in the Kunar area, which is bordering Ukraine. I'm sorry, Ukraine, bordering Pakistan.
Right.
And on this patrol here, I asked the patrol leader, I said, how much territory do we actually control here? Because this is kind of up in the northeast corner. And he said, well, we control about 100 meters either side of the road that we're on. He said, well, that's not true. We control the road we're on and we influence 100 meters either side. But as soon as we roll past, then we have no influence or control over anything here. And then we could see, in that side, we could see probably 20, 30, 40 kilometers into the mountains on one side and about the same distance on the other side across the Kunar River. And I mean, this whole vast area, and we had literally no control at all. And that's with 140,000 U.S. and NATO troops on the ground inside of Ukraine. And in the key area on the border, we had virtually nothing. Now, what do you say, since you've been on the ground in this area, in this part of Central and South America, if we have the sum total of all the military personnel, 15,000, 18,000, what can we do?
Try to avoid dying. Let's take you back to that convoy in Kunar. When you let's say you were standing in the back of a Bradley and looking out, you could see for miles, couldn't you?
Well, it was actually an MRAP, but it was the MRAP almost rolled into the Kunar River, so that's a separate issue. But,
okay.
But yeah, we could see quite a ways out the window. Yeah.
Okay, so go back and put yourself in that situation. Only add triple canopy jungle that's on either side of the road.
We didn't have that. Yeah.
You can see 50 yards maybe. Well, that gives the Venezuelans a real advantage in fighting back against any convoy. Americans are going to travel. They're going to either be walking, they're going to be driving down a road, or they're going to be flying in helicopters. And I guarantee you the Venezuelans have surface-to-air missiles, shoulder-fired, that will take down helicopters. So, but you get back to the actual number of troops. We don't have enough troops to secure the road from the airport, I think it's the San Martin airport out on the coast, up into Caracas, and there are ambush points all along that route. So that's why I say I don't think Trump and his team they think this is a video game.
I'll never forget, Larry, and I wish I had, again, thought of asking Jerry to dig this up. It'd take too long right now. But at the beginning of you mentioned the Houthi one, operation in the Red Sea. Man, I'll never forget the initial statement that the Secretary of then Defense, Pete Hegseth, said, and how confident and cocky he was about how we are going to kill everybody who gets in the way here. Right. Nobody's going to stop. We are relentless, I think was the phrase he said several times, relentless in getting this done for a month until we figured out we couldn't. And then we just hit the eject button and said, yeah, it's a win. Anyway, moving on. Meanwhile, the Houthis never stopped interdicting traffic so long as the war was going on against the Palestinians.
Well, and they've still got the Red Sea shut down. No ship going to Israel is allowed to pass. So, we didn't change that situation on the ground at all. We just declared victory and said, okay, we win.
I think we lost a total of 21 Predator drones, and as you said, 3 F-18 fighter jets rolled off the decks. It was humiliating. It was not the Navy's finest hour, I think we can say. And the question is, if that's how we performed on that comparatively easy mission, what in the world are we thinking of here? But here's the problem. So I just showed you what Mike Waltz said there. For all the world, laying out the diplomatic foundation that we're going to do something anyway. And then he went one step further and said, tried to give some justification for why this was actually necessary.
In its own 2025 World Drug Report, the UN Office on Drugs and Crime identified Venezuela as the key trafficking route in the entire Western Hemisphere for illegal drugs.
Okay, two things here. First of all, let's pretend, and this, you can see where this is going to go on to point number 2, but point number 1, let's pretend that what he said there was accurate and that they were this central linchpin for drugs, etc. Does that give the legal authorization to the United States to attack Venezuela?
No, but we don't need legal authorization. We are the maker of the international base rules order. So we make up the rules as we go along. So, no, I mean, it's the hypocrisy of this is just staggering. But, Frank, we've been doing it now for at least the last 25 years. As you pointed out earlier, Colin Powell, we got to the UN and, we didn't get UN authorization to go to attack Iraq, as I recall. We just did it. And we didn't get UN authorization to go into Syria and to attack in Syria or Libya. And so, we get to make up and define what the threat is. If it was objective in terms of saying who's really the biggest supplier of cocaine, fentanyl, heroin, we start with Mexico. Afghanistan, while we were occupying, it was a major producer of heroin. And as John Kiriakou witnessed when he asked a farmer why they were still growing this, and the farmer replied, well, we were told to basically by the CIA, because the CIA wanted to use drugs as a way to try to weaken Iran and weaken Russia. And then, so they saw the heroin coming out of Afghanistan, using it as a weapon against Russia and Iran. So it's, it's this beauty's in the eye of the beholder. So is terrorism, so is murder, so is law breaking.
So that's one aspect of it. We trying to claim international law and all this stuff is just it's like a fig leaf if the fig leaf is dead and crackled and it doesn't hide anything anymore. But it's more than that. It's worse than that, because this fig leaf was completely manufactured. And this is what really, really got my goat this morning, is that when Waltz is reading that, he's reading the thing and he looks up and he says, Venezuela, according to the UN Zone 2025 drug document that talks about where all the drugs are going around the world, et cetera. He said they identified, the United Nations, as the #1 trafficker of drugs in this entire Western Hemisphere, he said. Well, turns out I went to that document because I now literally take nothing that they say at face value, and it turned out to be a good point here, because as it turned out, there was only 2 uses of the word Venezuela in the entire document. And one was, it just listed that Venezuela was one of the countries in South America or Central America, and then the other one was listed the country of origin of somebody who helped write one of the documents. That's it. There was nothing about any kind of drug trafficking nexus, but there was a lot of stuff on other portions of drug trafficking nexus, like for cocaine, like for codeine, and several other kinds of things. They had all these maps and stuff. And what you see when you look at these maps, you don't see Venezuela at the key heart of anything.
Yeah.
So he literally lied out his ass, looking right at the camera, and just flat out lied. And it's one thing, Larry, it's one thing, and it's bad to sit there and try to mock the international rules and say that we're going to actually follow law and this gives us the authorization when there isn't any such. But it's another level of just you said hypocrisy. There's probably some worse word. I can't think of it right offhand. That we're just going to lie about what we're trying to do anyway. I don't understand how we have gotten this far down to where we can now ritually lie to the point that even I, as an American who want us to succeed, can't take a word of our government at face value. And this is not, let me point out, this is not just the Trump administration. This is going on for a long time. He's just taken it to a whole new lower level.
No, it's there is a meme circulating online, and it's got a guy, a young guy, but he's dressed up sort of like a Donald Trump, and he's a complete loser. I mean, he gets rejected by women. He's terrible at sports, but then he goes to his locker, knocks on the locker, and it opens up, and it's a pair of Trump sneakers. Put these on, and it'll change your life. And he puts them on, and he goes back to the basketball court, and he shoots the ball, misses the net completely. But he said, "I made that shot," and he says, "What I've acquired is the confidence to convince people of my bullshit."
Wow. And actually I do have this on the screen. I want to show this. This is from that UN document that he cited. It says key findings, latest trends in drug market. This is the main cocaine trafficking routes. And you can see, this is what you said a second ago, Colombia and Mexico, right? They're the key ones. Yeah.
You got Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru.
And so what do you see here about Venezuela?
Yeah,
almost nothing.
Yeah.
Just a couple of little pieces of a line here, but you see all of this stuff going on in here and none of it here. So what that tells you is that we're just lying. That Venezuela's not. But why do you want to do something so easy? It just takes a little Control F and search, and you'll see that it's not there, and that there are these other things there. And of course, there's other areas too, none of which centered on Venezuela.
Yeah, no, it's why the U.S. no longer has credibility. And I take it you got the Chinese and Russians responding to that, right?
I do, yeah. And Gary, why don't you go ahead and roll that?
It seems that the White House decided to remove from the mothballs the previously embraced practice of portraying combating terrorism as justification for blatant aggression and intervention in the affairs of sovereign states. And this time, the so-called foreign terrorist organization has been labeled as being the legitimate government of the Bolivarian Republic. Their attempts to convince us all of the mendacious view that decision of the U.S. authorities alone is enough in order to transform a sovereign state into a criminal enterprise, any acts of force against which can now be called a law enforcement operation and the defense of national interests.
The U.S. actions and the rhetoric have led to continued tensions in the region, raising serious concerns among regional countries and the international community. The UN Charter establishes the fundamental principles governing international relations, including sovereign equality, non-interference in internal affairs, and peaceful settlement of disputes. They constitute the cornerstone of international rule of law and are crucial for maintaining world peace and security. The U.S. actions seriously infringe upon other countries' sovereignty, security, and the legitimate rights and interests, gravely violate the UN Charter and the international law, and threaten peace and security in Latin America and the Caribbean.
See, one of the things that really just makes me cringe when I see this kind of stuff is that we commonly, and have for a long time, we mock Russia left and right about saying, oh, you talk about rule of law and that there you go and invaded Ukraine, blah, blah, blah. We can talk a lot about, but that's one of the things we accuse them of. We also look over at China and say all the time that you better not invade Taiwan. You better not do any of that kind of stuff because that violates the rules-based order and all this kind of stuff. And yet here we are at the table with both of the representatives of those countries, and we are literally doing the very thing we are either accusing them of doing or wagging a finger and telling them not to do. Yeah. And the question I have for you, Larry, is at what point do those actors and others just say, I don't even care what you say anymore. We're going to do whatever we want, and we're going to mock you if you say anything else.
Yeah, well, they've this is why Russia and China have partnered and are expanding the role of BRICS, and they're also partnering though on military side. You know, they're actively cooperating with supplying Iran with defensive weapons and defensive systems to combat against future Israeli, U.S.-backed Israeli attacks. They have supplied some weapons, some capabilities to the Venezuelans. I'm not sure what the I know that the Chinese have provided some air defense systems that even before this latest dust up. It is the United States is living this fantasy that we can go it alone in the world, that we don't need anybody else, that we're powerful and strong enough, and that's just no longer the case. And this, I think, it is highly. Will we kill some Venezuelans? Yes. Will we maybe depose Maduro? Yes. Will we bring stability to a political system? No. And it will become another unstable hotspot. U.S. personnel will be constantly in danger that go down there. There'll be some Venezuelans that support us, and there'll be some Venezuelans that will try to kill us. And, frankly, we will have earned it. But it is, I watched firsthand how poor the planning was under George W. Bush for going into Iraq. I was friends, and I emphasize was, with L. Paul Bremer, Jerry Bremer, who was selected to become, the poobah, the big chief in Baghdad after we invaded. And I had lunch with him the day before, or 2 days before he got selected for that position. And I called him up. I said, "Hey, who did you piss off?" And he goes, "Well, when the president calls, you've got to say yes." I said, "Okay, well, Jerry, let me help you." I said, "Let me put you in contact with Pat Lang." Pat he set up the Arabic program at West Point. He and his wife, Marguerite, taught Arabic to U.S. cadets at West Point for 2 years. Pat was also the defense attaché to Saudi Arabia and the defense attaché to Yemen. Pat also was the one who was selected to hand carry intelligence to the government of Iraq during the Iran-Iraq War and help the Iraqis plan their final offensive. He knew Iraq, he spoke Arabic. He was later he went on to become, actually at this time, he had been the chief of the Middle East division at Defense Intelligence Agency. So that was like a 2-star equivalent. And so I told Bremer, I said, "Hey, Jerry, sit down and talk to Pat." Bremer's response, No, I don't need to hear anything from him. It's that kind of arrogance, because Bremer didn't know a goddamn thing about Iraq other than he could find it on a map. And what happened? Let's send all the Baathists home. Clean the army out of those Baathists. Let them take their weapons. Who cares? Then all of a sudden we get a sustained so-called terrorist campaign, because these unemployed soldiers, the only way they could make money was getting paid to plant bombs. And so that's what I mean. The United States absolutely sucks when it comes to planning for these kinds of regime changes through force. And I'll guarantee you the Trump administration has cocked this up beyond belief. And they're only going to find, when the body bags start coming home to Dover, and Trump, they may have to build a little cabin for Trump out there on the tarmac, because he'll spend so much time receiving bodies.
And to what extent? I mean, right now, given the continued buildup of all the military forces there, some even this past weekend, were continuing to build up on some locations in Puerto Rico, as it turns out. Yeah. And a lot of what could be rehearsals, or at least demonstrations and flybys with B-52s. Other kinds of warships that are moving in different directions, airplanes, fighter pilots moving in Venezuelan airspace, etc. And now then this here on the diplomatic front. Do you think that we are potentially, at the 11th hour before military action comes, or do you think this is just posturing?
Well, actually, it's both. It is most of it right now is posturing. It's trying to provoke a reaction from Maduro that we can use to fully justify us attacking Maduro and taking military action against Venezuela. I saw that firsthand, and I think I've talked about this before, when I was in the Central American branch at CIA in 1988. Remember, we invaded Panama in December of '88, but starting really in the fall, late summer early fall of 1987, the CIA had received authorization through a finding signed by Ronald Reagan to proceed to try to overturn the government of Manuel Noriega, even though Noriega had been a signed up CIA asset. And so we began a series of provocations and trying to organize an internal coup. But the goal was to get Noriega to react first. And I think ultimately he did. And that's why, we then unleashed hell on Panama. But, Panama is a really bad example for what we were able. We even had difficulty in Panama. And Panama is, you can drive from the Pacific side to the Atlantic side in about an hour and a half if there's no traffic. So it's not a big country. It's rather small. And we had the advantage that we had a military base, headquarters, Quarry Heights, which is where Southcom was located at the time, just outside of Panama City. And then also we School of the Americas, we had a military base up in the northern end in Cologne. We don't have that in Venezuela. And the Venezuela has the potential to be very hostile territory, and we don't have the logistics lines to be able to support troops that get in there and get caught.
So let me ask you, I know we're a little bit over time already, so I'll be quick. Two different scenarios. Just give me your off the cuff assessment. One is, let's say, what happens if we get Maduro quick? We know where he is. We have good intelligence. We have a big airstrike, a big, heavy bombardment, whatever, whether it's from ships or from planes or some combination thereof, and we actually get him and we knock him out. What happens next?
Okay, then there'll be an insurgency that'll start up. We saw that in Iraq. Remember all of our confidence about we'll get Saddam? Saddam was a little bit easier to find. And remember how we struggled to do that. But hey, once we got Saddam, man, mission accomplished, right? No, the fighting just shifted, and I'm sure there are people that don't like Maduro, but they sure as hell don't like us being in their country with guns. I bet you can find people in America that hate Donald Trump. But if the Russians or Chinese launched a special military operation tomorrow where they attack Washington, D.C., and they take and kill Donald Trump, you know what? And then they fan out to start taking control of other parts of the country. I guarantee you there are a number of those people who hated Donald Trump who are going to be shooting at and killing those invaders. Same thing. And we don't understand that.
And I'll just add another layer to that. Even if we bring in this Machado woman, who's allegedly going to be the next one to install, who got the Nobel Peace Prize and all that, weirdly. Look, all of the infrastructure that exists for Maduro right now is in place. Just because you take him out doesn't mean all these other people who have incentive and motivation to stay are just going to suddenly go, okay, here goes Machado, we'll just give it all to her. I mean, you talk about building up an insurgency, you almost build up a civil war in whoever's on her side and whoever's on these guys who don't want to lose power, and they're not going to be just kicked out like the Baathists were, like you mentioned a minute ago with Bremer. I mean, this could go sideways all different kinds of ways.
Well, look, Donald Trump gets elected as president. Does that give him immediate control over all the bureaucracy in Washington, D.C.? Oh, hell no. So
we're seeing that on display today.
Yeah, I mean, we're witnessing here, and these people don't have they're not allowed to bring guns to work normally. I guarantee in Venezuela they'll be bringing guns to work. The people there are well armed, and again, we don't have control. We can cut them off at the port. We can cut them off air access. Can't cut off the borders. Those borders are porous, and those borders have sustained the FARC in Colombia for 50 plus years.
Yeah, decades. And so then that kind of leads to option number two. So number one, that option, all these branches and sequels that would fall off, they're all bloody and they're all inconclusive. Correct. Well done. You sparked that flame, right?
Right.
Now then the second one is we go and we try that same situation with ships and planes and all that, airstrikes, but Maduro survives that. He gets out and then he does kind of like Saddam and some of these other things, and he goes out into the jungles you're talking about, and he starts hiding from there. So we didn't get him. Now what?
Yeah.
What do we do?
Then our options are, well, we're going to have to institute a draft. We're going to have to plus up our army substantially, and we're going to have to send enough troops in there to go get him.
And if we don't, if it's politically impossible, you can't draft. No one's going to decide him for that. Then what does he do?
So, or the alternative, the same thing would be request assistance from countries like Russia and China for a negotiated settlement. That if our concern really is the flow of drugs, I know that Russia shares that concern. I mean, they've had a problem with the flow of heroin into the country. Oh, wait, we were doing that. Okay. But China would be of the same mind. They felt the consequences of the opium wars, more than a century ago, thanks to the Brits. So there are ways to enlist, actually, if you're serious about building an international rules-based order and having the most powerful nations of the world cooperate, that if the goal is really to get Venezuela to stop being a transit point for cocaine and marijuana, which according to the U.S. INCSR report, the International Narcotics Strategy Country Report or Strategic Country Report, whatever it stands for, they've been a transit point for drugs, and a lot of it, 40% of what goes through there goes to the U.S. and another 50-60% go to Africa and Europe. So, we got a way that if that's really our concern, there's a way to deal with it peacefully without killing a bunch of innocent people or killing people without taking any kind of due process to ensure that they're actually guilty.
Yeah, we don't seem to be concerned much with that. No. My worry, Larry, is that in option number 2, I painted where we went in with big and blew a bunch of stuff up, killed a bunch of people on the ground. We didn't get him. Is that now then there's no political will whatsoever to have a big war going on. I mean, he ran on not doing that. So we can't then expand that on a big scale and go in and do something. And then what are you just going to say, bummer, we missed. Okay. And then come home, because then you look really stupid. I don't know what Trump's options would be, because they're all bad, every one of them.
Yeah. Well, again, they're not well thought through. They've taught this Hollywood solution. All we got to do is kill the top guy, and that'll solve the problem. Okay, we've got the case study on that, 2003 with Iraq, and by when did we hang Saddam? Was it 2005?
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it was.
We finally captured Saddam. Delta Force rounded him up. And then we put him on a show trial. The only thing we didn't have was what was his name? Otto Freisler, the screaming judge, Nazi judge that tried all the collaborators, conspirators against Hitler. But we found him guilty and we hung him. And that solved the problem in Iraq, didn't it? No, it didn't. To this day, it's not solved. So and again, the Israelis follow the same stupid plan. Look at all the Hamas leaders they've killed and how that quickly ended the insurgency, right?
Hezbollah, you can add that to the list.
Yeah. So at some point, folks, let's step back and recognize killing is not going to get you ahead. In fact, killing ought to be the very, very last thing that we do, which, as well, let's call that the central message of Christmas. It's about birth and life. It's not about death. And yet we in the West have become a death cult. We kill unborn babies. We kill foreigners without a second thought. We kill American citizens overseas just because we put a label, they're a terrorist, and we can kill them. There is no value placed on human life. And
can't argue with that.
It's become corrosive.
And eventually it'll be suicidal if we don't get a handle on it.
Right.
And one of the reasons why I'm so grateful in this season where we celebrate the birth of the Prince of Peace, and we would like to have that mentality reign over everything, because that's the one chance you have to actually get something done there. And where you can at least mentally start to whittle into that flawed and horrific mentality of just kill everybody you don't like.
Right.
Because ultimately that's what it's going to take. It's going to take a superiority of ideas. And you're either going to get there because you're going to recognize the superiority of it and it overcomes those bad ones, or because these bad ones reign supreme and then they collapse on top of all of us and then we fix it because in the wreckage afterwards. And I would
Correct.
like to avoid that second one.
Yeah, I'm with you, brother.
But and that's why we're so grateful to have you guys. And even though this is a dark episode that we did on certain levels, we do want to end on this positive scene here. And Gary, if you want to come and join us, and
oh, there he is.
Oh, wait, is this 4th of July or is this?
Listen, it's a beautiful holiday to celebrate freedom, Jesus' birthday, and put it all together. That's what we're here for.
Outstanding.
Yeah. So we got Larry's shirt, we got Gary's hat, and we got my tank. So somehow it all works to peace.
Yeah, and we want to thank you, Larry. You've been such an integral part of Deep Dive. You've been co-hosted. You've done it all, and we want to thank you for this year.
Well, you guys do some very important work. Your session the other day with Jacques Baud was particularly compelling. Not that all of your shows are not worth listening to, but that was, that one was really off the charts, and you did such a service to Jacques.
Yeah, it was really something, Larry. Before we even had him on, we had people asking for him, when are you going to have him on again? Because he doesn't make so many rounds, as other people do, as you do, for example, So he's a little bit more not obscure,
especially on English channels.
Well, right, exactly right. Yeah.
And I think what was so appreciated by the viewers was how pissed off Danny was over this. You said, "Ooh, I don't want to piss off Carol Davis. That would be a bad day."
We're looking to start a GoFundMe account for him in America. He says he basically cannot do it there in his home base.
Oh, boy.
So we're trying to establish that over here. So he's talking to his legal representatives, and hopefully we'll get that established for him. And a lot of people have been asking.
I worry that there may be another conflict that could be in the preparation stage in our own hemisphere here in the United States, and that is down regarding Venezuela. Now, of course, there's been a lot of issues. The United States has been, in my view, completely blowing through any kind of rule of law that existed and having lethal military operations against alleged drug boats in the Caribbean and Pacific Oceans, just unilaterally just executing people because of being accused of something. Who knows if they were actually guilty or not? Just trust me, we have perfect intelligence, which of course we never have. But that's what we're saying here. Now, all of a sudden, we have 15% of the United States Navy arrayed in a basically a strike package against Venezuela. And we've been waiting for some time that they've been in position and could have done something, but so far nothing has. Well, yesterday at Mar-a-Lago, one of the reporters asked President Trump, by the way, is regime change your operation, your objective here? Where are we going with this?
Well, I think it probably would. I can't tell that. That's up to him what he wants to do. I think it would be smart for him to do that. But again, we're going to find out. Look, Venezuela did terrible things to the United States. They sent hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people into our open border. They sent their criminals. They sent their prisoners. They sent their drug dealers. They sent their mentally insane and incompetent people into our country more than any other country. Others did too. The Congo did. Others did too. And we just let them come right in because we were run by a stupid president. But you don't have a stupid president anymore.
Yeah, I worry a little bit about his confidence in himself there. But let's look at some of the fundamentals that he said. First of all, is there any international justification to overthrow a regime because you allege that millions of people from that country have come across your borders?
First of all, Donald Trump has a selective memory. Okay, the mass migration policy from Venezuela, that green light started under guess who? Donald Trump in his first term. And of course, that policy was then taken with extra vigor under Joe Biden. Why? Because the U.S. saw that it's the same reason they took refugees from Syria during the Europe and the United States and Canada, all the NATO countries. Because if you showed up at the border and you claimed political asylum and you said, I'm fleeing the Assad regime, automatic, straight through, case settled, you're in, and with tons of benefits. Exactly the same policy, the United States, with people coming from Venezuela. We're fleeing Maduro, automatic asylum, done. So, and what Joe Biden did was formalize it. Go look it up. Up to, I don't know, probably well over 300,000 Venezuelans to be, with a wave of a magic wand of the U.S. government, given fast track settlement on their, status in the United States. Venezuelans and this is on the condition. There's a political condition attached to this, because this is a strategy that the United States, that European countries have employed for decades, which is they create instability in a country like Syria, in a country like Libya, and prior to the collapse of that country, they'll absorb. They did the same with Iraq. They do it with Iran with the collapse of the Shah. They take in what will be the future fifth column. Canada does this as well. There'll be the future fifth column, which will be used to mobilize and create the main tip of the spear for the international effort for future regime change. This is a post-colonial strategy. This is a neo-colonial strategy. And you combine that with the NGO, soft and smart power that's deployed through the Open Society and so forth. There's just even Amnesty International to some degree is also involved in some of this, specifically with Syria, also Afghanistan. So it becomes the cause du jour in the future. And so Donald Trump opened the door for this policy during his first term. And now he's turning around saying, oh, Biden let in 1 million people. No, Maduro's flooding our country with immigrants over the border. This is a total lie. Millions of Venezuelans have not come over the southern border in the last bunch of years. These people are coming from other countries. But those who are coming know that they are going to get fast-track process, at least under Trump 1 and Biden, as long as they're anti-Maduro. This is a policy. And the Democrats get the added value of future registered Democrats. From those immigrants, and there's also a political motivation there, which I think we should all be honest about. That's also a byproduct, convenient byproduct, partisan byproduct of this type of engineered immigration. But it is geopolitical. It is geopolitical. Make no mistake about it. Same in Europe. This is a long-standing policy.
Now, the reason why I brought the whole topic up and relates to trust is because we have always bragged about, maybe never really applied all the way, but periodically we did pretty good, this whole international rules-based order, right? That we have since World War II, the last 80 years. That's what's, provided security and stability. And for a lot of the period of time, it did, genuinely so. But now then you see with this whole thing we just discussed with the Russia-Ukraine war that the norms have kind of gone out the window, and we aren't even trying to physically forget the words, trying to bring peace in. And we seem to be setting the stage for more conflict later on. So that's undercutting trust around the world, not just with Russia. But down here, there is the issue of what is the rule of law? Can a powerful country like the United States just use its military power for geopolitical reasons, as you say, that have nothing to do with actual national security, or follow the rule of law? Now, there are some in the United States that are saying, hey, this is not okay. We have the U.S. Constitution. We have the 1973 War Powers Act. They have to be followed. Tim Kaine, senator from Virginia, and Rand Paul from Kentucky have both been articulating, both from the Republican Democrat side, have been saying this for a while, that we need to follow the rule of law and the Constitution. But there are others that say, yeah, you know what? Not so much. In fact, we're going to show you a couple of retired generals who want to say that's really not a big issue. First of all is Jack Keane, who says, look, we've been breaking the law for a long time. Why worry about it now?
First of all, sanctions and other means just haven't flat worked. They didn't work during the Biden administration, and President Trump came back and recognized that none of this has worked. The previous presidents have had to deal with the same thing, narco trafficking, fraudulent elections. In '89, President H.W. Bush did a physical takeover of the regime in Panama just for that reason, a narco trafficker, a human trafficker, and a fraudulent election. And President Clinton did much the same in '94 in Haiti, when a dictator deposed a democratically elected president, and President Clinton wanted that president returned to power. There's precedent for this. Congress was consulted, but neither one of those presidents, a Democrat or a Republican, sought approval from the Congress. The Congress is being consulted about this. They may disagree with it, and they have a right to do that. But I don't believe the administration is going to seek their approval.
So according to Brother Keene here, the standard isn't what the Constitution says or the U.S. law, but because, Obama and Clinton and Bush, and because they ignored all these things before, add Biden into that, add Trump in the previous, because they've ignored it before. Congress can say whatever they want, I guess, but really, we don't have to worry about that because we broke the law in the past. What does that tell you about the rule of law, and what does that do to trust around the world in the U.S.?
Back to the question of trust, your original question. All of these agreements, international law, treaties, what they called international norms for years, they're all based on trust, especially amongst allies. This is the big break from the past. Normally, the United States would demand international law of its adversaries. And of course, it would never follow it itself, and it would like a waiver. And if the ICC dared, indict any of our officials under the Bush administration, they passed the Hague Invasion Act, threatening to invade the Hague if they indict any of us, not just ours, but our allies. Okay, so clearly, there's always been a double standard with regards to international law. The difference is today in 2025, this administration is actively threatening its allies with secondary sanctions, and I would put punitive tariff threats under the banner of secondary sanctions because he is using them clearly as a punishment tool, and also threats to take territory, which the United States has also done. People should not forget about that. And Trump has also revived this talking point in recent weeks about expanding the United States land holdings, for instance. So these are things that are going to affect U.S. allies. That's a big difference. So now you will have a complete breakdown of the international system. And this is a system that most of the world relies on for order, even though the United States can discard it whenever it wants, can apply it selectively. The rest of the world, the irony of this Hobbesian state of nature in the realist world, which John Mearsheimer and others articulate, and that's the paradox of realism, is the countries at the top can demand international law and people to abide by it and conform to it, and everybody, even though they don't have to ever abide by it, the U.S. or its close allies like Britain, but the rest of the world, including Russia and China, must use international law in order to protect themselves and to band together with countries that they're allied with and trading with, because that's all they have. When you have total anarchy in the international system, and you have other second and third tier powers that are not no longer respecting international law and norms, then we have huge problems, and that could happen in a kind of world war situation. So everything the United States is doing is in some ways mirroring a lot of the conditions that led to World War II, for instance. Just what is being done to Venezuela, what's being done to Russia, and what was done to Japan prior to December 7th, 1941. So, and that we can take those lessons from history and we can learn. But the takeaway here is this: that this is not the world of 1940. This is not the world of 1915. This is a different world. You have emerging Asian powers. You have China as a legitimate, bona fide, potential imperial hegemon, global hegemon, economically, technologically, and ultimately, eventually, militarily. You have Russia as a bona fide superpower, a modernized, renewed superpower, thanks to NATO's proxy war in Ukraine. And you have the BRICS network, which is congealing faster than anybody could have imagined as a direct result of U.S. Actions and policy, including what Trump has done is he's done the impossible. He has undone all of the CIA's efforts in the Western Hemisphere to set Venezuela against Colombia and Brazil against Venezuela. He has now created potential belt of solidarity that's going to run right through Latin America, from Mexico down through Central America. This is why the U.S. is putting so much energy in rigging the election in Honduras, because they would like to use that as a hinge in Central America. This is why Trump is backing Nasri Asfoura, the extreme right-wing candidate. And by the way, this is also why Israel is taking a big, keen interest in Latin America, because Israel and the United States are partners in this effort. Because Israel wants to also put right-wing governments in all of these countries, because they want to change the voting at the United Nations level for the recognition of a Palestinian state. And so they're looking at that, not only that, but also the business opportunities and the arms sales opportunities for Israel within Latin America. So the U.S. and Israel has the Isaac Accords. And people don't know about this, hasn't got a lot of media coverage, but this is the Latin American version of the Abraham Accords. They're working with the U.S., the Israeli delegations, teams to try to normalize relations with a lot of these Latin American countries that traditionally have been pro-Palestinian and anti-Zionist. Okay, this is a big thing, the Isaac Accords, no small feat. And there's a lot of, Honduras is another front line on that. And what you're going to see is in the next year, you're going to see movements made against Nicaragua and also a renewed push against Cuba. So they're hoping for a domino, a type of a domino thing in Latin America.
More like a
this is no
bulldozer.
different.
Yeah.
Yes, no different from what Henry Kissinger was doing in 1973. You know, this is just a new chapter of that. They scrambled jets to kill Salvador Allende in the presidential palace on September 11th, 1973. Okay, and now people in Latin America are like, hey, you guys have actually not changed in 50 years, America. You're at it again. And we remember what that was like.
Let me show you one of the things that's maybe facilitating that, and something we should be alarmed about here in the United States, because otherwise we're just going to be this brigandish power that is not even completely decoupled from the rule of law. And if we get decoupled from the rule of law, you were talking about the trust issue on the one hand, but even domestically, when you get decoupled from the rule of law and there's no consequence, baby, that is going to start applying even domestically. Here's how it's applying internationally. So again, we get back to the rule of law. Again, another retired general, this time Wes Clark, was asked, wait a minute, but don't we actually have to have Congress designate something as an act of war? And especially if we're going to seize tankers from Venezuela, that is an act of war. Aren't we in danger of doing that without having gone to Congress? Watch his answer.
I don't think it's a declaration of war. I think it is a means of putting economic pressure on. Now, when you put ground troops in, you really need to get some authorization from Congress for that, because that's a campaign of indefinite duration once you put ground troops in. But this is a naval action to seize sanctioned ships. As far as we can tell, you're doing it with the Coast Guard resources. We've seized ships before. It's been done, and it's an easy way to put economic pressure on Maduro in Venezuela.
It's an easy way to put pressure on. So we've done it before, so no big deal. Who cares if it's within the rule of law? We can do it, and unless troops are on the ground, we don't have to worry about it. But even then, you can see, we'll figure that part out later. What do you make of this whole mentality that says that it's easy to put pressure on somebody even when there's no legal justification for it?
You have to look at the underlying issue that Wesley Clark and all of the mainstream media will not address. What is the U.S. basis for unilateral sanctions against Venezuela?
Yeah.
What is the basis? This is an undemocratic regime. You might not like the election results in Venezuela, but the majority of people in that country lean left and support Nicolas Maduro and the Bolivarian Revolution, period. Now, it might not be ideal for Koch Industries or Cargill or any of these other monopoly, or Chevron or any of these other U.S. oil companies, but that is the way it is. So because of that, the U.S. believes it can, because it has unilateral sanctions that are political sanctions. They're based on politics. These are regime change, incentive sanctions, and that they think that they can then engage in piracy internationally on the high seas because they're issuing unilateral sanctions, and that gives them the right to steal property and assets, to seize ships, to blow up ships, to blow up oil rigs, to blow up offshore oil reserve deposits, floating deposits. I mean, that's where this is going to head with the U.S. And so there's no logic to any of this. There's no justification for it other than just rapacious. I mean, I hate to use the word because I don't want to be called a hard leftist, but it's rapacious imperialism when you strip it down.
Hey, so,
and
so
that's
let me ask you,
that's
because
the
we're
message
running
they're
low.
sending. Yeah.
We're running low on time here now. I want to get your comment on something that is very much related to that. I think related directly to what you just said. When asked yesterday by Trump, these oil tankers that we captured, they say, well, they're sanctioned so that we can seize them on the high seas. And they say, what are you going to do with it? Oh, we're going to steal it. We're going to keep the ship. We're going to keep the oil. Is there any international agreement that allows that to the country?
No, it's also setting a bad precedent because another state could turn around and do the same thing, and basically say, well, the United States is doing it, set a precedent there. So it's going to destabilize the international legal framework. You've also got the insurance industry. This hits at commerce. You know, this is the thing. The United States justified waging a military attack on Yemen for a period of months, that they were disrupting commerce, international commerce, and breaking international maritime law on the high seas and so forth. The United States is actually doing it, where Yemen was doing it specifically, and they announced why they are doing it as a deterrent to stop support for Israel, to stop what the Yemeni Ansar Allah in Sana'a said was a ongoing genocide, and they were using the International Courts of Justice interim designation for that and the ICC indictments as their international justification for using hard power to prevent support for a rogue state, in this case, the state of Israel. Think about that. Yemen went through all of that gymnastics to justify what they did at the Bab el-Mandeb Straits. The United States hasn't done anything. All Trump's done is wave his magic wand and say narco-terrorists, and that's it. And not only that, Trump seized the Venezuelan state oil company's assets during his first term, liquidated it, paid off Juan Guaido and a bunch of other very dodgy opposition figures, and who knows where the rest of it went. And so that's what he's done already in his first term. And so that's how can that be justified under U.S. law? So these things are going to, as you said, Danny, these end up eating away at the domestic legal framework as well. That's what's happening in Europe right now because of the Russian asset seizures. It's destroying the European legal system and the European framework that provides stability, that makes it a functioning economy and gets foreign direct investment into the continent. That's all being threatened as a result of this foreign policy.
And as we showed yesterday on the show here, it has domestic implications as well in Europe, as Colonel Jacques Beau has been censured and actually sanctioned an individual for the crime, there is no crime, of not agreeing with what they're saying. So it's not just restricted to what's going on internationally. That's what I say. It's happening there. I mean, who knows how much longer you're going to be safe, or I'm going to be safe, or Glenn Deason. I mean, we're telling the truth, but some people don't like the truth. And how long is it before they start using the rule of law or the power of law against us?
That's the point, Danny. That's the point, is that these start off as being sanctions used internationally. In the case of Europe, it's to damage Russia, to hurt Russia, to punish Russia. But as it's failing to punish Russia, clearly, it's not punished the Russian economy. It's not punishing Russia on the battlefield. And as it fails, the policy remains and then is turned back on their own population to attack their political opponents who are opposing this failed policy. The United States is doing exactly the same thing. I could talk about the attack on free speech regarding Israel that this administration is engaged in, stopping campus protests against the U.S. support for the Israeli genocide. As an example, that is a foreign policy that has come back to basically fester within the domestic political setting, ultimately undermining the U.S. Constitution. I'm talking about freedom of speech and assembly, two basic rights in the United States. So what you're saying here, Danny, is very important, that this isn't just an externalized issue vis-a-vis Venezuela, vis-a-vis Russia, vis-a-vis whatever target country, Iran. These end up basically infecting the domestic political framework, the machinery of democracy at home. They ultimately do, because the policies don't go away. The sanctions don't go away, and these types of punitive, administrative, arbitrary punitive measures. In the U.S., it's all of that power concentrated in the executive branch, from administration to administration, Democrats to Republican to Democrat to Republican. Show me a president that rolls back executive power in the last 30 years. I've not seen it.
Yeah, we just roll back the rule of law, and that is also bipartisan. But listen, we really appreciate you coming on today and sharing this stuff and being completely, I mean, kind of like what this is now, this group is. We are all unintimidated and uncompromised to tell the truth, no matter what it is, no matter the cost to even some of our brothers in this industry here. And we're going to keep doing it, and we appreciate you coming on our show to share these truths today.
Thank you, Danny. Merry Christmas.
And a Merry Christmas to you too, and to all of our viewers. And by the way, here in the United States, of course, we're ahead in, well, actually, we're behind on some of the clocks, but tomorrow is New Year's Eve, or Christmas Eve, rather. And in the United States, it's often kind of the unofficial start of the holiday season. But here at the Daniel Davis Deep Dive, there's too many things going on, so we will have shows for you tomorrow. We'll also have almost certainly some kind of information for you even on Christmas Day, because we don't want you to be without. But we will look forward to sharing Christmas Eve with you tomorrow here on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive. You know, I don't try to talk you into buying gold or tell you how to run your stock portfolio, but there is a way you can help us. Subscribe, hit that like button, and share this with somebody you love.
Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Wednesday, December 24th, Christmas Eve. Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson joins us now. Colonel Larry, a pleasure, my dear friend. Thank you very much for your time with us. It's always a delight to chat with you. We've had so many of these wonderful conversations during the past year. I'd like your thoughts, Colonel, on the EU sanctioning of Colonel Jacques Beau, a Swiss military and intelligence veteran of very high esteem, because he had the temerity of quoting Vladimir Zelensky's former chief spokesperson, who was opining on the true status of the special military operation in Ukraine.
Many of us, as you might imagine, have been talking about that, both in Europe and here. Some of the group knows him really well. I don't know him personally, but I do know of his work. And it's preposterous. And it is a demonstration in a microcosm, if you will, but nonetheless painful for him, I'm sure, of how paranoid Europeans are, particularly people like Merz, Starmer, and Macron, and Rutte, and others, who are looking at their jobs literally evaporating in front of their eyes. And they don't know what to do except to react that way. And they react that way and hurt individuals like Jacques.
In the same week that Colonel Beau was sanctioned, and these sanctions, I mean, he can't even go to the supermarket to buy a gallon of milk unless he happens to have cash in his pocket. If he leaves the EU, he can't come back.
I asked yesterday, does he have a Swiss passport? I imagine he does. And the individual who knows him quite well told me, yes, he has one. I said, well, why can't he appeal to the Swiss government to honor his passport and let him come back to Switzerland and get out of these idiots' way?
You know, Switzerland has rolled over and played dead since, I'm sorry to bring back these memories, Colonel, the George W. Bush administration intimidated the daylights out of the Swiss banking system. They haven't done anything for Colonel Beau, and he devoted his entire career to the security of Switzerland. But in the same week that the EU did this to him, Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, appeared on the floor of the House of Commons and publicly threatened a Russian oligarch who was forced to sell his interests in a British soccer, they call it football team, that if he doesn't give them the contents of his bank account so they can give it to the biggest crook in Europe, Volodymyr Zelensky, they will just take it. So I think you're right. They are extremely desperate, and they're resorting to behavior that if done by anyone but a government, they would prosecute the person for it. You're going to steal 100 million pounds from a guy's bank account?
I look at Stormer as, you know, that old song, I think it was the Monkees or Herman's Hermits. Henry the Eighth I am, Henry the Eighth I am. Stormer,
Yes.
he is.
Yes.
He's destroying everything that Britain was supposed to, well, what are we doing in the Caribbean, but the same thing. Everything that Britain was supposed to feel about what we might call the rights of its people. They don't care about them anymore. And I'm hearing from people I know well in London, I've been there every year for almost 30 years, got a lot of friends there, that it is truly draconian.
Wow. What is the basis for, as you understand it, Colonel Wilkerson, the maniacal, fanatical fear that European elites have for President Putin?
Well, first of all, it's something they thought was going to be a cash pie for the rest of their natural lives, political, if not biological. And what I mean by that is they thought they could hold on to the empire, its skirts, if you will, and through that live in whatever way they wanted to live. And that they chose. And I'm still trying to figure out exactly how this happened, because it certainly wasn't the case with the leadership we dealt with in the early 1990s, and even to a certain extent that we began to deal with in the early 2000s, though it had changed markedly. And that leadership has as a raison d'etat Russophobia. And it has now turned it into a political tool that they cannot discard. They have generated the tool, they have put the tool in effect and in motion, and they can't discard it. They're like dictators riding the tiger. You know, they can't discard what they've created. But what they've created is a bugaboo in Russia, and that's the only way they think they can survive, is by enhancing that threat, making it look absolutely draconian, and getting their people to go along with it, and making them pay 5% of their GDP too.
Yeah. So thanks to the Prime Minister of Belgium, supported by the Prime Minister of Hungary, Mrs. von der Leyen and her coterie were stopped from seizing the Russian bank accounts in the Belgian banks. I understand, according to our friend Gilbert Doctorow, that at the last minute, President Macron opposed this after having supported it during most of the time leading up to it. But whatever, it didn't happen. But instead, the Europeans are cobbling together a package of 100 billion euros to lend to Zelensky. The terms of the loan are that it will be repaid when Russia loses, and when, this is ridiculous, Russia pays reparations for the damage caused by the special military operation. What bank in Europe would accept that promise as a condition to repay? Somebody's got a sign on the dotted line.
Maybe the same bank that's going to deal with Scott Bessent in the first week of the new year when he faces a $3 trillion debt that no one in the world wants to buy, and that the only country in the world capable of buying it is China. But back to your question about Macron, I understand he got a pretty good briefing, and Macron understood what a horrible precedent that would be to set, much as horrible as the precedent we set with our Biden and then Trump deepened sanctions on Russia. These are not things great powers want to be doing to one another. And you certainly don't want to use the banking system to do it. And Macron backed out of it because he realized that was not a precedent he wanted to set.
Well, I'm going to make you laugh a little bit. Our friends at Russia Today have put together a hilarious Christmas parody mocking the EU. Chris, cut number 1.
It's all because of potency. Power bills too high to pay. It's all because of Putin hate. Fixed of meal price feels like a scam. It's all because of Putin down. Your taxes fund the war instead. It's all because what Putin said. Bureaucrats are on your back. It's all because of Putin whack. Santa robbed your kids this year. It's all because of Putin, dear. No new hope for year ahead. It's all because of Putin dread. It's all because of Putin. It's all because of Putin. It's all because of Putin. It's all because of Putin.
That's good.
I mean, it really makes the point. I don't know where they got those actors to play von der Leyen and Zelensky, but they did a terrific job.
Terrific job. I was thinking the whole time, too, of a friend of mine in Moscow who was telling me some things that I would flip that around if it were being played in Moscow, saying it's all because of Putin. We've got a great GDP. We've got a great economy. We've got clean streets. We got safe places to go. We got great things to do. It's all because of Putin.
You can see how old I am. Chris reminds me, there's not an actor or performer in that. It was all AI.
That was her. That was her, I think. I thought it was her, and they were just, putting the words in her mouth, and you weren't paying attention, so you didn't recognize the lips and the words weren't synced.
Some computer crafted the whole thing. Here's something that a computer did not craft. Donald Trump's latest threats and his latest urge for acquisition. Watch the smirk on the face of his Secretary of Defense, who calls himself the Secretary of War. Chris, cut number 3.
We need Greenland for national protection. They have a very small population. And I don't know, they say Denmark, but Denmark has spent no money. They have no military protection. They say that Denmark was there 300 years ago or something with a boat. Well, we were there with boats too, I'm sure. So we'll have to work it all out. But he felt very strongly we need Greenland for national security, not for minerals. We have so many sites for minerals and oil and everything. We have more oil than any other country in the world. We need Greenland for national security. And if you take a look at Greenland, you look up and down the coast, you have Russian and Chinese ships all over the place. We need it for national security. We have to have it.
Does he know what he's talking about, Colonel?
I don't think he knows anything about what he's talking about. 300 years ago, we were doing something in Greenland? 300 years?
I wonder who it was. Who could it have been? Christopher Columbus's great-great-grandson?
Erickson and the Vikings. I mean, he is just a recipe for disaster when he opens his mouth. You never know what he's going to say. He's right about some of the things he said, and he's going to be seeing that more often. Putin's already paying him back in his own coin, and Xi Jinping will too. They're going to have ships all up and down the Atlantic coast and in the Caribbean and elsewhere. It is their way of showing him that when he did what he did in Ukraine, that is to say, Biden, Trump together, we, the United States and NATO, we can pay you back in your own coin, and we are going to do so.
Our friend and colleague, Larry Johnson, and this actually gets to what you said earlier about Scott Bessent's need for cash, and the only available place is China. China's not going to buy our debt. China's selling our debt, which is going to raise Scott Bessent's interest offerings, which means that the American government, again, is going to have to borrow money to pay interest on borrowed money, in part because the last ship they seized in the Caribbean contained 1.9 million barrels of oil bought and paid for by China.
Yes.
Are they crazy, Uncle Larry? Do they know what the hell they're doing?
They are crazy. And here's the thing that Bessent understands, I think. I don't know him personally, but I've listened to him. I think he understands this. I'm not sure he's going to get the leeway to act on it. But there needs to be a deal between Beijing and Washington, and the deal needs to be that we will coexist, literally, and that Beijing doesn't really want our complete collapse. And I think that's a fair argument with Xi Jinping, because he does not want our complete collapse. It would mean all kinds of problems for him if we just completely collapse. So the deal is to go in and start this discussion and getting it going in a positive way, in what I call a win-win way, because that's the only way we're going to get out of this. They're the only people in the world that have the money to do this in the kind of fashion that it needs to be done, so we don't get swamped and literally wrecked with regard to our fiscal situation.
Well,
and the oil business, Trump doesn't understand the oil business. He simply does not understand it. I'd love to drag him over to the 2009 oil distribution war game, essentially, simulation we ran in Beijing, with all the countries mainly in the world interested, Japan to Russia, and Lloyd's of London and Marriott and other legal people with regard to the international realm and the law thereof. You can't get away from this. It's inescapable. Everyone needs oil, period. Everyone in the world needs oil. And when you start monkeying with this the way we're doing now, and you're a criminal in that system, which is what 60, 70% of the world thinks now, you're just cutting your own throat. So Scott needs to get to Beijing and on bended knee, take some knee pads with him and start talking with Xi Jinping seriously. Otherwise, Americans are going to see disaster.
Here's the criminal confessing to his crimes. Chris, cut number 9.
What are we going to do with the oil that we have?
Going to do with what?
The oil that has been seized. The United States seized 1.9 million barrels of oil on December 10th.
We're going to keep it. We're keeping it.
Where's it going? Are we going to sell it or put it in the strategic?
Maybe
oil
we'll sell it. Maybe we'll keep it. Maybe we'll use it in the strategic reserves. We're keeping it. We're keeping the ships also.
Well, if that is not piracy on the high seas, and because of the integral nature of oil, about which you just so nicely spoke, to human existence, a war crime, I don't know what is.
High seas piracy. I love the part about keeping the ship. There's a reason to do that, Donald, because we can't build any. You can't make this stuff up, Judge. We are at a very crucial point right now, and we are led by a man who not only shows incompetence on a daily basis in every area of strategic and policy thinking, he is incompetent in terms of the most important thing that we're looking at right now, which he claims to be an expert in, and that's debt.
Well, here's his opposite number saying that Russia and Europe should join commercial forces with each other and see if Donald Trump pays attention. President Putin.
And if we were to join our efforts with European countries, Russia and European countries, our joint GDP would be higher than the United States. Of course, this is all theoretical, but it is quite obvious the fact is quite obvious that unifying and complementing our abilities, we will thrive instead of fighting each other like you are doing.
The adult in the room, Colonel.
It's very interesting to hear that, because I've always had this sneaking suspicion that one of the reasons that Europe took the posture it did immediately, about midway in the first Bush administration, George W. Bush administration, was because there were thinkers over there that realized that if they did that, they would be much more powerful, even possibly than China, because you had this $22 trillion GDP in Europe. You had a fairly substantial GDP in Russia. You bring Russia into Europe, then he's right. You're probably going to have the largest GDP in the world. At the same time, they were worried about what that meant for the alliance and what that meant for their relationship, the transatlantic relationship. And the people who won out were the people who bet on that rather than betting on unity. And as they did that, they developed this propaganda campaign to create Russophobia all over Russia, all over Europe. And we just picked up on it. So we both have Russophobia campaigns that paint Russia, as that video sort of depicted, paint Russia as the world bugaboo.
Threats to Maduro, threats to seize Greenland, threats to the president of Colombia, murders on the high seas, stealing oil tankers and stealing their contents. Does Donald Trump behave as if he thinks he has a license to kill?
That would be a way to describe it. I think he behaves as if he thinks he is sitting on top of Henry VIII again, the greatest empire in the world, upon whom no one can make any entry. No one can make any dent in their solidity and in their defenses, when he is actually sitting on a paper tiger that he is going to find out just the weakness of, the depth of the weakness of, if he does any of these things that are looking at us right now this Christmas season, which includes war with Iran, because Bibi is intent on getting now the United States to do his heavy lifting with regard to Iran, with Venezuela possibly. And we're also looking at the situation in Europe getting out of hand if the Europeans keep poking their fingers in Putin's eyes.
Where are the Witkoff, Kushner, Dmitriev talks going to go? I mean, what do they talk about? The Russian demands haven't changed one iota. There's nothing to negotiate.
I think there's a realization of that in that group. I think they have come to that realization. And what they're doing now is trying to figure out how to sell it. Not just sell it to the world, but sell it to the American people in terms of the political strength of the Trump MAGA group, and how to sell it to the Europeans if they even want to sell it to the Europeans. And also, what's the strategy for countering the Europeans when they realize we're dead serious and we've done a deal?
Colonel, here's an interesting clip of an American speaking in Italian. You'll know who he is as soon as you see him, suggesting a 24-hour worldwide Christmas Day truce like we had in World War I, when American and German soldiers actually sat down and dined together. Chris?
Once again, I make this appeal to all people of goodwill to observe, at least on the day of the Savior's birth, a day of peace. Maybe they'll listen to us and there will be 24 hours, a day of peace throughout the world. Thank you.
The Chicago-born Pope.
Yeah, I'm all for it. Love is Italian. He actually sounded like a native.
Yeah.
But you know, that's a marvelous gesture, but the fighting will just go right back on afterwards.
Yeah, I think you're right. Colonel, I think you know we passed the $100 million, or I wish it were, the 100 million views threshold last weekend. Thanks in no small measure to all of your wonderful conversations with us. I hope we can continue them in the new year. I am deeply grateful for you letting me kiss you on your head. I am profoundly grateful for our professional collaboration and our personal friendship, and I'm grateful to our mutual friends who brought us together. Thank you, Colonel. Merry Christmas to you and your family.
Thank you, and the same to you. And
Thank you.
may that new year be at least livable.
Yes. Back at you, Colonel.
You can feel the pressure hanging in the air right now, the kind of pressure that settles over a region when everyone knows something is shifting, but no one wants to say it out loud. As of today, December 23rd, 2025, Iran is conducting wide-ranging missile drills across multiple locations, and Israel is treating those drills not as routine exercises, but as either a rehearsal for war or a deliberate smokescreen. Iranian-affiliated media have circulated footage described as missile launches linked to areas around Tehran, Isfahan, and Mashhad. And even where independent verification is still catching up, the timing alone is doing the talking. Earlier this month, Iran's naval forces carried out large-scale exercises around the Strait of Hormuz and the Gulf of Oman, firing ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones at simulated targets. When you put all of this together, it looks far less like coincidence and far more like calculated signaling in a region that remembers all too well how surprise and miscalculation can spiral out of control.
אנחנו יודעים שאיראן מקיימת תרגילים בתקופה האחרונה. אנחנו עוקבים אחרי זה, ואנחנו עושים את ההיערכות הנדרשת. אני רוצה להעביר כאן בצורה ברורה לאיראן. כל פעולה נגד ישראל תענה בתגובה חריפה מאוד.
Israel's response has been predictable on the surface and deeply revealing underneath. Publicly, Israeli officials repeat the familiar language of vigilance, preparedness, and deterrence, warning that any Iranian move would be met with overwhelming force. Privately, briefings to allies paint a much darker picture, framing Iran's drills as potentially masking a surprise strike, feeding a constant narrative of imminent danger. This fear is not theoretical. It is rooted in Israel's own military doctrine of preemption, a doctrine built on striking first, sabotaging adversaries, and assuming escalation control. When you normalize that behavior for decades, you also normalize the anxiety that someone else might one day do the same to you. That paranoia now ripples through Tel Aviv, where panic buying, emergency messaging, and heightened alerts tell a different story than official calm. And it is the same paranoia that fuels aggressive online censorship campaigns targeting videos like this one. So like and share this widely to help break the algorithmic chokehold, and subscribe if you have not already. The American dimension under the Trump administration only sharpens the tension. The June 2025 conflict, which lasted nearly 2 weeks and ended through U.S. brokered pressure, still looms over every calculation. Joint U.S.-Israeli military drills have continued alongside constant political messaging about
revolutionary salute to our brother LRP for the donation to the war chest. Revolution is a way of life. I absolutely appreciate that love. Soldier, salute.
Deterrence and readiness. Washington speaks the language of stability while backing Israel's overwhelming military dominance, then expresses alarm when Iran rebuilds the very capabilities it needs to avoid being crushed. That contradiction is not accidental. It is structural, and it sits at the core of this crisis. This is where I'm completely unapologetic about my position. Iran's posture makes sense as self-defense when you look honestly at the historical record. Decades of sanctions designed to strangle its economy, assassinations of scientists and senior commanders, cyber attacks like Stuxnet, covert sabotage of infrastructure, airstrikes on allies across the region, and repeated open threats have defined Iran's security environment. In that context, missile development is not aggression.
It falls within the framework at which United States, and more specifically, Department of State of United States behaves. You see them referring to rich people in other countries as oligarchs, but in their country, they're considered to be entrepreneurs. In the United States, they really need to crack down on protests because of law and order. But if it, God forbid, if Iran stops rioters, then it becomes authoritarianism. Secret police for countries like Iran, undercover cops for the United States, gulag for countries like Russia, but prison labor in the United States. So the hypocrisy of the United States isn't lost on anyone. Anyone can see it. But, with regards to the things that you actually mentioned, it is absolutely the case. During the past recent months, Israel carried out attacks on 7 different countries. And this is apart from the continuous violation of ceasefire, the supposed ceasefire with the Palestinians. And they have weapons such as over-the-horizon air-launched missiles that they use, Jericho missiles that are, I think, ground-launched missiles, but they have a very large range, and a nuclear program that actually has developed and proliferated nukes, which they seem to be not really pressured about because of the fact that IAEA isn't impartial in this whole endeavor, and it is basically trying to run interference at the behest of the United States and the countries in NATO. But in that sense, considering every capability that the United States and Israel have, and the support that Israel received from the entirety of NATO countries, French war minister actually stated that they helped the Israeli regime intercepting certain drones that were launched in a counterattack by Iran. Germany, Spain helped indirectly through.
Iran's ballistic missile program did not emerge from ambition alone. It was forged in necessity during the Iran-Iraq war, when Iranian cities were pounded and Tehran learned firsthand the cost of technological isolation under fire. Over time, through reverse engineering, domestic innovation, and painful trial and error, missiles became the one domain where Iran could realistically compensate for the denial of modern air power. Systems such as the Fateh and Zolfahar, short-range missiles, the Qiyam and Shahab families, and solid-fuel platforms like Sejil form a layered deterrent designed to survive strikes, relocate quickly, and impose real costs on any attacker. Newer designs, including maneuverable re-entry vehicles and hypersonic-style concepts, carry enormous signaling weight. Even where technical claims are debated, the goal is not perfection, but credibility, survivability, and deterrence.
I'm the president of peace. Look at all the peace I'm bringing. Launch those bomber strikes on Venezuela. Let's blow the hell out of those boats and kill a bunch of innocent people. It just sort of seems a little contradictory, the narrative there. And in fact, they've gone from emphasizing that we're stopping the flow of drugs into the United States to now it's, oh no, we're going after all this illicit oil that Iran. These people are pure capitalists, okay? They care about making money.
After the June war, rebuilding was not optional, it was essential. Competing estimates about Iran's production capacity continue to circulate, with some clearly exaggerated for political leverage. But the strategic reality is straightforward. Iran is restoring and expanding what was damaged, and Israeli intelligence takes this seriously enough to raise alert levels. From Tehran's perspective, this is textbook deterrence logic. If you were hit once, you make sure the next strike is harder, riskier, and far more expensive for the attacker. Israel's missile defense architecture is advanced and real. Iron Dome David's sling and arrow systems have intercepted thousands of incoming threats. But missile defense is not a shield of invincibility. It is bound by physics, inventory limits, reaction time, and saturation dynamics. Mixed salvos combining drones, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and decoys stress even the most advanced systems. Regional conflicts have already demonstrated that interception rates fall sharply as complexity and volume increase. This is why Israeli rhetoric about existential threat often rings hollow. You cannot build your security on endless escalation and then act morally shocked when others prepare to hit back. Looking ahead, Israel's likely responses follow a familiar script. Netanyahu's political survival has long depended on projecting strength, framing threats as existential, and pulling Washington ever deeper into Israel's security orbit. Renewed strikes on Iranian-linked infrastructure covert operations, intensified lobbying for U.S. military involvement, all fit that pattern. Every step raises the risk of miscalculation, especially when both sides are operating under heightened alerts, compressed decision timelines, and deep mutual distrust. The implications extend far beyond Iran and Israel. Any serious escalation threatens global energy markets through the Strait of Hormuz, rattles regional partners, and risks igniting fronts from Lebanon to Yemen. The irony is impossible to miss. Israel, widely understood to possess undeclared nuclear weapons, lectures Iran and the world about restraint, responsibility, and danger. Deterrence is treated as legitimate for some and criminal for others, depending entirely on who enjoys American protection. Iran insists these drills are routine deterrence, a defensive posture in an environment where force has been normalized against it. When you strip away the propaganda that claim aligns with lived reality, peace will not come from more threats, more drills, or another round of so-called necessary preparations. It will come only when the rules apply equally, when preemptive violence stops being rewarded, and when accountability replaces hypocrisy. Thank you so much for watching. Support honest journalism by subscribing. That is all I ask, and until
Technology configuration. Welcome to Deep Dive Defense. Over here we give rare insights you won't hear elsewhere. This video is about Iran's most advanced ballistic missile, known publicly only in its civilian application as the Qaem-100 Space Launch Vehicle, SLV. While the advanced features of this missile are indeed dual-purpose, suitable for a space launch vehicle, they also directly enable an intercontinental range ballistic missile. This is possible without any real modification on the SLV, and in fact, the technologies it employs are truly cutting-edge by any measure. These technologies are combined in this manner by only a very few nations currently developing advanced intercontinental range ballistic missiles. Like and subscribe if you want to support the channel in the algorithm. Now let's start. The Qaem possesses a very similar technology configuration to, for example, the United States ground-based interceptor and the future Sentinel intercontinental ballistic missile. The primary distinction is that the objective pursued by Iranian designers was the creation of a miniaturized, light intercontinental range ballistic missile. This aims to enhance its survivability in second strike scenarios, and to permit widespread deployment that is almost impossible to target reliably. This video is actually the second on this channel concerning this missile, with the first one, in the nuclear weapon context, linked above. However, this time we will examine the numerous details that render the Qaem so unique and relevant today. The Qaem might be the first advanced Iranian missile that does not merely attempt to catch up to cutting-edge technologies developed by the 5 main nuclear superpowers. Instead, it was created based on a set of next-generation requirements not yet operationally fielded by other global powers to that extent. Consequently, the group behind the Qaem is the most elite one within Iran's extensive missile industry. This team is the successor to that of late General Hassan Tehrani Moghadam, who is known as the father of the Iranian missile weapon. He and his team of technicians, who were working on the predecessors of the Qaem-100, based on the giant boosters developed for the identical named Qaem Heavy Space Launch Vehicle, were killed in a tragic accident in 2011. Yet their work did not cease. The remaining team from the original Qaem project just adjusted their development roadmap. They chose to pursue a less spectacular-looking, smaller space launch vehicle in the first project phase, one possessing significantly greater technological sophistication, but also easier to produce. The requirements defining a next-generation intercontinental range ballistic missile are generally consistent throughout the world. Solid propellant missiles are generally preferred in that role, due to their constant on-alert, quick launch capability, and their usually faster speed boost phase ascent. Here, the key features include the use of a single high-specific impulse nozzle for each stage, and the utilization of a flex seal nozzle thrust vectoring control system. This method does not waste the chemical energy available in the booster, like less efficient thrust vectoring methods, such as jet vanes or separate vernier thrusters, but instead burns it at the highest available efficiency within the single combustion chamber. The other key requirement for next-generation intercontinental ballistic missiles is that of the lowest possible maintenance combined with a prolonged ready-to-fire status. However, there are additional requirements that must also typically be mastered first. These include high efficiency for every stage, usually achieved by utilizing a composite, mainly carbon fiber motor casing, alongside high-energy solid propellant with a higher specific impulse. Missiles like the future U.S. Sentinel ICBM are believed to possess all these features. However, the QAM incorporates an additional element of high sophistication, namely its miniaturized size. While this might sound counterintuitive, as a smaller missile possesses less throw weight compared to larger ones, the reality is that it is generally easier to create a large missile within the intercontinental range than a small one like the QAM. In fact, after mastering heavy, large ICBM like the R-36 and Peacekeeper, the United States and the Soviet Union, at the end of the Cold War, had the primary goal of fielding a miniaturized ICBM with higher survivability. Once the development of such a miniaturized missile is completed, the production of it is in turn easier than heavy ICBMs. For Iran, the added survivability of a miniature ICBM defined the specific goal it would pursue in developing the QAM-100. In practical terms, this meant the QAM-100 would need to be as small as possible, while still fulfilling the requirement of delivering a payload of approximately 300 kilograms to a range of at least 10,000 kilometers. However, another key requirement for such a miniaturized intercontinental ballistic missile is high quantity, since it delivers just one warhead instead of the several carried by heavy ICBM, equipped with multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles, MIRV. A high number is necessary, which in turn demands a sufficiently low production cost and a high production volume. This high quantity is essential because the small size of the ICBM enables it to be carried by standard-sized trucks that are externally indistinguishable from civilian trucks. Consequently, in operational use, a large fleet of such launchers could be deployed to different regions of the country, embodying the principle of not putting all eggs in one basket. Therefore, another key feature of such a miniaturized ICBM is low cost and high deployed numbers. In practice, this means that if Iran possesses hundreds or even a 4-digit quantity of QAM ICBM launchers, it will possess an assured second strike capability against its main adversary, the United States. This is because even if nuclear warheads are used to target the QAM-100 ICBM launcher arsenal, some are assured to survive and retaliate. Thus, the reality is that while the future US ICBM, the Sentinel, costs many tens of millions of dollars, the design of the QAM-100 is geared towards low cost and high production numbers. Now, let us take a deep look at the specific details of the QAM-100, which make it so advanced. All 3 stages utilize carbon composite single nozzles with large exhaust diameters. Each of these 3 nozzles has its flex seal thrust vector control powered by electromechanical actuators, which require no maintenance-intensive, risky fluids and operate solely on thermal batteries. Each of the 3 motor casings, which hold the 3 nozzles and their thrust vectoring system, is constructed from carbon fiber composites, granting them low empty weight and high stage efficiency. The first missile stage, in order to avoid the use of hot thrusters with liquid propellants, employs small triangular steering fins to actively stabilize the first stage in the roll axis. Once the first stage is burned out and jettisoned, and the shroud of the third stage has also been discarded. The second stage ignites under near vacuum conditions. It is believed that compressed air, cold thrusters in the third stage, are then utilized to provide the second stage with active roll axis stabilization, once again avoiding potentially dangerous liquid propellants. Once the second stage is also discarded and jettisoned, the small third stage continues to accelerate the single re-entry vehicle until all propellant has burned out. During this phase, the Flex Seal nozzle thrust vectoring system continuously changes and recalculate the flight trajectory toward the intended target. This compensates for the unpredictable final amounts of thrust the burning out third stage still provides. This is a delicate technology first mastered by the US in their Trident I submarine-launched ballistic missile. It represents a solution to avoid the rather heavy thrust termination system which the current US land-based Minuteman III ICBM missile utilizes. This is an older feature Iran also used on the 2000s-era Sajil-1 medium-range ballistic missile. But this new, more sophisticated solution, called the Generalized Energy Management System, or GEMS by the US, is the most advanced thrust termination solution known. After that, the hypothetical re-entry vehicle is separated from the third stage, is actively spin-stabilized in its roll axis, and flies without further interactions toward its target. Such a small third stage and re-entry vehicle would not be possible without the GEMS thrust termination system combined with a highly miniaturized and lightweight, high-precision inertial guidance system. This system is necessary to put the unpowered re-entry vehicle on the correct trajectory to hit its target. Both of these features were reasons why miniaturized intercontinental ballistic missiles were largely impractical before the 1980s. The GOM weighs just less than 19 tons, making it well transportable by an ordinary commercial truck. Its length is only 14.5 meters with a diameter of 1.25 meters, the small fins excluded. This makes it an extraordinarily small and difficult to detect asset for a future IRGC strategic missile capability. The role of a GOM-100 ICBM can either be conventional, enabled by its low cost and high quantity, or unconventional, tipped with nuclear warheads and equipping Iran with a first strike and second strike capability. The nuclear application is straightforward and would work sufficiently well with the precision an unguided re-entry vehicle would have at 10,000 kilometers maximum range. Whether the circular error probable, CEP, is 300 meters or 3 kilometers only matters in a nuclear role if Iran intends to perform counterforce strikes against US nuclear weapon infrastructure, which would require higher precision delivered nuclear warheads. But for the main deterrence role of counter-value strikes against industrial or population centers, even a CEP of 3 kilometers would be sufficient. However, if the intention is to use it at least partially as a conventional intercontinental range weapon, it would require some form of steering on its re-entry vehicle to achieve a lower 2-digit meter precision. Integrating a steered, maneuverable re-entry vehicle into the limited payload weight of approximately 300 kilograms could drastically reduce the amount of explosives the warhead can carry. Consequently, Iran would have to master a lightweight re-entry vehicle equipped with a suitable 3D carbon-carbon composite nose tip, acting as the main heat shield. Adding to that also means for steering and correcting trajectory errors during atmospheric re-entry would be required. Iran has demonstrated advanced carbon-carbon composite nose tip designs with suitable cone angles for high-velocity, high-accuracy re-entry vehicles and missiles, such as the Fatah-1 or the Rezvan. However, mastering a lightweight, intercontinental range maneuverable re-entry vehicle, rated for Mach 20, would present a challenge at the very edge of what is technically feasible with today's technologies, especially given the cost constraints such a conventional weapon system would face. As of late 2025, following the 12-day conflict involving Iran, Israel, and the United States, the failure of that coalition to remove the roughly 450 kilograms of highly enriched, weaponizable uranium in Iran's possession, combined with the subsequent ban Iran imposed on any further inspections by the International Atomic Energy Agency, has practically created a condition in which Iran is an ambiguous nuclear power. With its nuclear warhead designs proven by the early 2000s Ahmad program, which even then possessed advanced features, Iran is now only dependent on suitable fissile material to create a notable arsenal of nuclear warheads. That condition is now a reality with the mentioned 450 kilograms of highly enriched uranium. About its whereabouts, nothing is known due to the ban on nuclear inspections. Hence, in the current scenario, and depending on Iran's technological sophistication and nuclear warhead design, anything between 20 to more than 100 fission or more likely thermonuclear warheads could be quickly assembled to create a serious nuclear warhead arsenal. In this context, the Qaem-100, if deployed in the high numbers for which its design is suitable, could become Iran's primary first strike and second strike nuclear delivery system. In that scenario, a 3 or 4 digit quantity of Qaem-100 launchers would be dispersed throughout Iran's missile cities or other suitably secured areas. A portion, such as 1/10 of the missiles, would be equipped with a real nuclear warhead, while the remainder of the arsenal would be equipped with heavy penetration aids, decoys, that are practically indistinguishable from actual warheads when approaching their targets. In this scenario, the sheer number of potential launchers equipped with nuclear warheads, coupled with the inability to definitively assure that all of the real missiles have been identified and located in real time, would practically result a robust second strike capability for Iran, a capability only the 5 main nuclear powers possess, enabling a deterrence posture based on mutual assured destruction. The missile closest in configuration to the Qaem-100 is the U.S. Ground-Based Interceptor, GBI. While slightly larger, this ballistic missile defense and anti-satellite weapon possesses a very similar configuration, though it lacks some of the very low maintenance features of the Qaem-100. Naturally, instead of an application as an ICBM or space launch vehicle, a modified variant of the Qaem would make an ideal, mobile, anti-satellite weapon, similar to the US GBI. Currently, it is believed that Iran has already finished the development of the next variant of the Qaem family, the Qaem-105, with its Nafe upsized second stage. This would notably increase the payload to nearly 500 kilograms, while maintaining about the same small size as the Qaem-100. This slightly heavier variant would certainly be better suited to be equipped with an intercontinental range, Mach 20 rated maneuverable re-entry vehicle. This would more credibly open the path to a conventional use of the Qaem ICBM for psychological deterrent strikes against the continental United States, without employing weapons of mass destruction in the form of nuclear warheads. No other country has developed a conventional pinpoint strike ICBM, but also no non-nuclear power has reached the technology level Iran has to develop such a weapon. As already mentioned, the low-cost design and configuration of the Qaem credibly enables its use as an intercontinental range conventional strike asset. The latest news on the Qaem development was a test of a presumed upper stage around October 2025, visible from satellite photos. This proves that Iran is very much aware of the immense deterrence the technology it has mastered with the Qaem base launch vehicle offers for its strategic military posture. So that's all for today. If you liked it, give a thumbs up, comment, and subscribe. It really makes a difference in the YouTube algorithm and is a great support to the channel. The Real Enthusiast can become members and given access to exciting membership area material. Thanks for your support and motivation. See you next time.
Hey friends, today we're dropping a real bombshell of a story. And I mean that literally. It's about an actual powerful bomb. What if I told you Iran may have gotten its hands on one? Stick with me because this is a wild ride you won't believe. Not long ago, Israel launched a strike on a neighborhood in Beirut. They used some of the most advanced bombs in their arsenal. Precision weapons designed in the US, meant for pinpoint destruction. But one of those bombs didn't explode. It just sat there. Hezbollah got to the site fast, really fast. They found the bomb intact, unexploded, just lying there. Not only did they secure it, they reportedly studied it, and then, according to some sources, sent the parts to Iran. Now, what does that mean? Reverse engineering, maybe? Could Iran actually unlock secrets of one of America's best bombs? The US is spooked, and honestly, for good reason. Their reactions show just how serious this whole thing is. The bomb's name is WW3, or the Smart Bomb. It's designed for high-precision strikes with minimal collateral damage. Lightweight, compact, but packed with power and tech. It can glide toward targets from a long, safe distance. The pilot just releases it, the bomb does the rest. Using GPS and inertial guidance, it hits right on target. It's about 1.8 meters long, weighs around 110 kilos, and its warhead is strong enough to punch through bunkers. Now imagine a bomb like that falling into Iranian hands. Not theoretically, but a real-life intact specimen. All engineers need is a close look under the hood, and boom, a treasure trove of sensitive information. The US and Israel both know how advanced this is. It's not just about destruction, it's about electronic resistance. Encrypted GPS, anti-jamming capabilities, stealth materials. Even tricking it with electronic warfare isn't that easy. So what happens if Iran reverse engineers this system? They could drastically boost accuracy in their missiles, or build defense systems to detect and neutralize these bombs. That's exactly what Washington is terrified of. Reports say the Pentagon has labeled the situation sensitive. Some news outlets say the US demanded the bomb back, but Lebanon hasn't handed it over. Hezbollah is staying quiet. This is turning into a full-blown intelligence standoff. Now, let's talk about the WW3 specs a bit more. Each fighter jet can carry 4 of these per standard mount. Because it's so light, it's incredibly practical in real combat, and it costs about $40,000 to $50,000 per bomb. It has a range of over 100 kilometers. That's serious. The aircraft doesn't even need to enter enemy airspace. And the precision, less than 1 meter margin of error. Perfect for dense cities or surgical military operations. Its body is made with stealthy radar-resistant materials. Guidance systems are hardened against jamming and spoofing. It's an all-weather weapon. Night, storm, rain, you name it. No wonder so many countries are lining up to buy. Israel was among the first to get its hands on it. They nicknamed it Sharp Hail and used it plenty. It's been deployed in Gaza, Syria, and now Beirut. But one failed to detonate, and that changes everything. If that bomb really made it to Tehran, then wow, that's a direct peek inside Western military engineering. A real-world sample, not some black market blueprint. It's like hitting the jackpot for any reverse engineer. Circuit boards, flight controls, fuses, sensors, all exposed. They can study every detail and recreate key systems. From drones to guided missiles, the impact is huge. It's a shortcut in research that normally takes years. Iran has been advancing in precision arms for a while. Now imagine them replicating a top-tier smart bomb. Higher accuracy, better targeting, lower error margins. Plus the ability to break through hardened bunkers. Oh, and there's another bomb in this story, the WW57. That one's a beast, over 13 tons of steel and explosives. A bunker buster that can penetrate 60 meters of concrete. Some say Iran got a piece of that too during a strike. During a reported U.S. attack on Iran's nuclear facilities, one GBU-57 apparently didn't explode and was recovered. If that's true, it's an even bigger tech gold mine. This is one of America's most powerful non-nuclear weapons. Iran claims they've built a lighter version of that warhead. It's being tested on missiles like Khaibar or Fatah. Early results show it can pierce 20 meters of reinforced concrete. Not as deep as GBU-57, but still impressive. What does all this tell us? The game has changed. It's not just about rockets, it's about smart tech now. Iran is clearly chasing its own precision-guided systems, and that could tip the military balance in the region. The US wants none of that because it's a real threat. These weapons aren't just powerful, they symbolize trust. When a US bomb lands in enemy hands, it's bad optics. It means your tech might be turned against you someday. That's why Washington is pressuring the Lebanese government. They want the bomb returned, but nobody's cooperating yet. Hezbollah might be holding on to it as a bargaining chip, or maybe it's already in Tehran, who knows? All right, folks, if you've stuck with me this far, thank you. If you found this fascinating, give it a like and sub. Drop your thoughts, questions, or theories in the comments. And don't miss our next video, it's just as explosive. A failed bomb has now sparked a whole new battle, not on the ground, but over information and tech. If Iran really got the secrets inside that warhead, it could reshape power dynamics in the entire region.
That's the bunker buster. Mean no more hiding underground for years.
How often they can launch. I've written another article for New Eastern Outlook. It is titled, "A New Space Race Above Earth May Determine Who Prevails Upon It." And for a lot of people, they don't really pay attention to what's going on in space. There's a lot of things going on Earth that seem more immediately concerning. But I wrote this article to raise awareness of the fact that, yes, whoever is controlling space above Earth has an advantage on Earth. So I'm going to read the article as I always do. I will add additional information when necessary. I will show you the sources that I cited while writing this article. And I will begin in early December 2025, earlier this month, private Chinese aerospace company Landspace test launched its Zhuqi 3 rocket. There is a CNN article, a surprisingly fair and balanced CNN article. Chinese reusable booster explodes during first orbital test in failed bid to catch SpaceX. Well, they were never going to catch SpaceX in a single first try. But as the article explains, it was actually very close to succeeding, especially for a first flight test. The rocket is designed to place payloads into Earth orbit while recovering its first stage booster, much like SpaceX's Falcon 9 launch system, and now Blue Origin's New Glenn rocket. SpaceX has been doing this for years. They have mastered this. They have revolutionized orbital launch with their reusable Falcon 9 launch system. Blue Origin, founded by Jeff Bezos, they have a rocket called New Glenn. It is much larger than the Falcon 9. Their first attempt, they could not nail the landing. It went up into orbit, but the first stage crashed. Second attempt, they successfully landed it. The Chinese launch was a partial success. The second stage successfully reached orbit, just like Blue Origin did on their first attempt, while the first stage struck the landing pad hundreds of miles downrange, destroying it. Now you have to think about that. If you have any experience, say firing a bow and arrow, a dart gun with a suction cup on it, or an actual real gun, even a tiny little millimeter off, you're going to completely miss the target. And the further away the target is, the further off you're going to miss. The fact that they were able to physically hit the landing pad hundreds of miles downrange tells you how close they got to recovering the first stage. Despite an obvious anomaly preventing its successful landing, industry analysts concluded the attempted landing came spectacularly close for a first attempt. It took Falcon 9 several attempts before successfully landing its first stage booster, and more recently, US-based aerospace company Blue Origin, 2 attempts to successfully land New Glenn's first stage. Blue Origin is only the second company to do so after US-based SpaceX, which for years now has routinely launched payloads into orbit with its Falcon 9 launch vehicle while recovering and reusing Falcon's first stage boosters. Let's talk about the reusable rocket revolution. SpaceX has refined this process of launching and recovering first stage boosters to the extent of launching, landing, recovering, and turning around boosters for their next launch within 30 days. And there are examples of them doing it much faster than that even, but around 30 days to turn around a first stage booster and reuse it for another launch. The rapid reusability of SpaceX's Falcon 9 has already revolutionized access to Earth orbit, drastically reducing costs while vastly expanding the number of launches possible per year. Blue Origin, should it successfully repeat New Glenn's recent success while scaling up production and its launch cadence, how often they can launch, would expand US access to orbit even further. They now have a huge advantage over other countries capable of launching payloads into orbit, including Russia and China. I'll get into that. Rapid reusability allows for the deployment of vast constellations of satellites over vastly shorter periods of time. SpaceX's Starlink constellation, a low Earth orbit network of 8,000 plus communication satellites, improves global coverage and significantly reduces signal latency over older, less numerous existing satellite communication networks located in higher geostationary orbits. The higher your satellites are, the fewer of them you need, but the longer it takes a signal to reach and return to Earth. If you have a constellation in low Earth orbit, you need many, many more of them to achieve full, reliable coverage, but the latency will be much less. Such constellations lend significant advantages to the nations deploying them or have access to them. As demonstrated in Ukraine, networks like SpaceX's Starlink don't just improve civilian satellite communication, but also enhance military communication as well as providing links to long-range drones, especially naval drones. Line-of-sight radio signals cannot match. Ukraine, or I should say the CIA, through Ukraine, developed these naval drones. They have Starlink receivers on them, and you're able to control them for as long as your sea drone can travel. As far as it can travel, you can control it because you're using satellites to control it. You're not controlling it line of sight with a radio signal. SpaceX has provided a significant advantage to the US commercially and militarily, an advantage the US seeks to fully exploit and to do so far beyond Starlink. So they said, this Starlink is a promising first start. We're going to expand on this, and we will try to do this as quickly as possible before anyone else catches up. For example, the US National Reconnaissance Office, NRO, has enlisted SpaceX and its Starlink platform to develop what it calls Star Shield. Let's take a look at that. This is the official SpaceX website, and this is them talking about Star Shield. It's basically Starlink, but they have the platform. They allow the NRO to install all kinds of packages on it, and then they're able to deploy large numbers of these, just like they're able to deploy large numbers of Starlink satellites. Now, Starlink is deployed in the thousands. So far, it looks like the NRO is deploying these in the hundreds so far, but that could, who knows, that could change. Starshield, essentially a military version of Starlink, merging its communication capabilities together with target tracking, optical and signal surveillance, as well as early missile warning capabilities. So just imagine having a vast network of dedicated military satellites like Starlink, but with greater capabilities applied to the battlefield. Between being publicly announced in 2022 to present day, nearly 200 Starshield satellites have been placed into orbit, an achievement that would have been impossible without SpaceX and its fleet of reusable launch systems, and an achievement other nations like Russia and China cannot currently match. So let's talk about Russia and China playing catch up. And I know people don't like when I talk about disadvantages Russia and China have, but they do have them. You need to talk about them. And you need to keep track of them. You need to be realistic about what is possible and what isn't. While nations like Russia and China have their own constellations of civilian and military satellites, neither have constellations as large as the US, primarily because of limitations on how quickly launches can be conducted to place them into orbit. China surely could make thousands of satellites, but they don't have the launch capacity to put them in orbit as fast as the US can. And right now, that gives the US a huge advantage, and I'll explain why here in just a moment. Throughout 2025, for example, and this gives you an idea of the advantage the US has, the US conducted approximately 170 launches versus China's 78 launches and Russia's 15 launches. So Russia is lagging far, far behind. China, not even really a close second when you really think about it. The US is sending more than twice as many payloads up into orbit, not payloads, launches up into orbit with all kinds of payloads on them. In previous years, China had actually overtaken the US in annual launches. At one point, China was launching more rockets into space than the US was at one point. However, with SpaceX's Falcon 9 launch system, this balance has been decisively tilted back in America's favor. This is where China's reusable rocket test launch, that's where this comes into play. Juki 3 test launches are expected to continue throughout 2026, with the company aiming to continue reaching orbit while finally successfully landing the first stage booster. You have to do both in order for it to be a full success. If you just get the second stage into orbit successfully, the launch is still considered a success, but the landing is a failure. And if you want reusability, you have to be able to reliably recover the first stage booster. From here, it will depend on how quickly and reliably land space can repeat this success, because you have to remember, you can't just land it, you have to refurbish it and launch it again and again and again for this whole process to make sense. As well as how fast it can expand both rocket production and supporting infrastructure to significantly expand its launch cadence, because SpaceX had to develop launch sites, ground support equipment, the whole manufacturing of the rockets themselves, all of that had to be expanded. All of that took time. It takes years to do that. You cannot just do it overnight. Just as SpaceX, a single aerospace company, has radically expanded U.S. access to orbit, land space could be positioned to do likewise for China. However, just as the U.S. now has Blue Origin pursuing its own reusable launch system, China has several other private companies and state-owned enterprises aiming to do likewise. And I should point out, there are other private companies in the US pursuing reusable rockets. I'm just talking about these larger rockets that have successfully recovered their first stage so far. But you should, if you're following this, you should keep an eye out for the smaller US-based aerospace companies pursuing reusability, because they will be testing their rockets. And then if it succeeds, they will expand production as well. And that will all play a part in this balance. Private company Space Pioneer and its Tianlong 3 rocket, and China's Shanghai Academy of Spaceflight Technology under the state-owned China Aerospace Science and Technology Corporation, CASC, as it's sometimes called, with its Long March 12A, not just Long March 12, Long March 12A. You have to look for that A. That rocket They are both preparing to launch and possibly attempt to recover the first stage booster either later this year or early 2026. And the CASC rocket, the Long March 12A, I'm almost certain they're going to try to recover the first stage this next launch. Space Pioneer and their Tianlong 3, they may just be testing, just launching it in general, and they may attempt to recover the first stage in later launches. Both rockets represent systems similar in size and with roughly similar potential capabilities as SpaceX's Falcon 9. So you would have 3 rockets in China. If they all somehow worked, you'd have 3 rockets similar to Falcon 9 with potential reusability, and all 3 of these companies, state-owned enterprises, would then expand production and then tilt the balance back in China's favor. That's what we're talking about here. Russia, on the other hand, had announced its Amur, or Soyuz 7 launch system, as a candidate for reusable launches, but has drastically delayed its development to prioritize the production and launch of existing rockets, including newer launch systems much closer to completion. So they have several rockets that they've been working on. Soyuz 7 is for way down the road. They have newer ones that are closer to completion, closer to test flight that they want to focus on, and they'll work with Soyuz 7 later down the road. So they continue with their launches of Soyuz crewed and uncrewed flights. These are the flights that send Russian cosmonauts, also sometimes US astronauts, up to the International Space Station. Sometimes a Russian cosmonaut will travel on SpaceX's crewed Dragon spacecraft to the space station. They also have Proton launches. The planned initial launch of Soyuz 5, which is intended to eventually replace the Proton launch system, and continued launches of Russia's relatively new family of Angara rockets. They have been launching those recently in recent years. Thus, the likelihood of Russia developing its own reusable launch capability in the near future is very low. However, as a close partner with China, it will likely benefit from any success China achieves in the near future in a variety of ways. And that means maybe they can pay to have payloads sent up into orbit by China from time to time, or much more often than Russia itself could launch those payloads. The balance of power China will create by matching or exceeding US launch cadence will be extended over Russia as well, because Russia and China are close allies. Let's talk about purpose-driven capabilities exploited by primacy-driven interests, because SpaceX is a very interesting company. It's an anomaly. I will talk about why it's an anomaly inside the US economic and political system. Let's just get into it. SpaceX and Blue Origin ostensibly claim their primary objective is to expand humanity beyond Earth. SpaceX has been focused on the colonization of Mars, while Blue Origin's founder, Jeff Bezos, has made proposals for massive orbital habitats similar to those proposed by physicist Gennard K. O'Neill in the 1970s in his 2019 For the Benefit of Earth talk. And when I talk about O'Neill cylinders, we're talking massive, almost worlds onto themselves, up in orbit. This is something we're not anywhere really close to doing now, but this is what Jeff Bezos was talking about in this talk, For the Benefit of Earth. And the link will be in the video description below. And I don't much care for Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk for that matter myself, but when someone has a good idea, if it's a good idea, even if you don't like the person expressing this good idea, it's still a good idea. And I think that his proposal is a good idea. Everything he said, or most of the things he said during that 2019 presentation, I thought were great ideas. And if people were actually focused on things like this, instead of primacy over the globe, over other people and other countries we have no business interfering in, the world would be a much better place, and even beyond Earth would be a much better place. Both companies are also participating in NASA's bid to return human beings to the moon. So Blue Origin and SpaceX are also involved in that. However, whatever truth there is behind these purpose-driven objectives, both US-based companies exist within a profit-driven system engaged in the pursuit of global primacy, increasingly using the capabilities these companies have developed, not for the benefit of Earth, but to dominate it. Okay, so these people are talking about benefiting all of humanity with space travel, but the system they exist within want to use these capabilities to dominate the Earth, not for its benefit. Blue Origin developed rocket engines. The BE-4 have already been used on joint Lockheed-Boeing and joint Lockheed-Boeing launches happen under the United Launch Alliance, ULA. They have conducted missions for the US NRO. So SpaceX and Blue Origin are helping NRO create this network up in space. In addition to SpaceX's collaboration with the NRO in the creation of Starshield, it has for years regularly conducted launches for the US Space Force and before that, the US Air Force. These capabilities that Blue Origin and SpaceX are helping create, in turn, have enabled continuous US global military encroachment and aggression, targeting both Russia and China's partners and allies, as well as threatening both nations themselves. So whether that was your intention or not, that is what your technology is being used to do. SpaceX is an anomaly amid the US aerospace industry, an industry that has for decades been driven by the pursuit of profit over any other purpose, including innovation. Before SpaceX's Falcon 9 became operational, most US national security payloads were launched using United Launch Alliance, Atlas V, and Delta IV rockets. Both rockets were fully expendable. You use them once, and then you have to completely build new ones. Their designs represented upgrades of rockets and systems from as early as the 1960s. Because ULA, and before that Boeing and Lockheed, which merged to create ULA, held a monopoly over orbital launches and existed solely to maximize profit, there was no need to innovate. Any excess revenue diverted toward research and development would only have undermined shareholder primacy, which is all they care about. Shareholder primacy and power. They want more power. Initially, lobbyists representing established aerospace corporations attempted to block SpaceX's entry into government launches. Today, US policy think tanks funded by corporations like Boeing and Lockheed hold SpaceX up as an example. They don't hold these other corporations up as an example. They hold SpaceX up as an example of the innovation possible because of the American system. But in reality, SpaceX succeeded despite it. So it's just interesting how all of these pro-American exceptionalism and pro-American primacy policymakers in these think tanks funded by corporations that pursue power and profit and are incapable of doing the things SpaceX is doing, always try to point to SpaceX as, see, that's what America can do, and that's why we need to continue pursuing policy. We can beat the Chinese. Look at SpaceX. China has nothing like what SpaceX has. And so you see the mental gymnastics these people perform while creating policies that are actually driving everything the US does, abroad and even at home. These same policymakers now seek to exploit the capabilities a purpose-driven SpaceX developed to enhance the continued profit and power-driven pursuit of US primacy. No matter what you think about Elon Musk and his politics, and I have absolutely no use for Elon Musk and his politics, his focus on SpaceX and Tesla, and there's several other technologically related pursuits of his that actually do make sense and are actually things going in the right direction. And he's a bit of a savant where he can see so clearly where things need to go in terms of technology. But then when it comes to politics, he's completely incapable, almost as if there's something wrong inside of his head. He's completely incapable of using the same first principles he used to build up these successful enterprises. He's incapable of using first principles to examine modern day politics, and he just simply lets his emotions and his prejudices, his bias, and his emotions more than anything else just completely take over. And it will be to his own undoing. I almost guarantee it. And it already has begun a process that looks more or less inevitably irreversible. But that's another story. Russia and China, on the other hand, have entirely purpose-driven state-owned enterprises engaged in every aspect of national development, from energy production to military industrial production and aerospace research and development. Russia and China have state-owned enterprises that exist solely to perform a function for the state. They do not exist purely to pursue profit and power like the vast majority of corporations across the West. This is what allows them to do more with less. This is why Russia is producing more weapons and ammunition than the entire West combined, because they have military industrial base that exists to fulfill the purpose of making arms and ammunition, while the collective West, their arms industry exists solely to produce profits, maximize profits at all other costs, including being able to produce enough arms and ammunition to win all of the wars that they themselves started. Russia's limitations come in the form of its smaller population and economy, and the constraints placed on it by ongoing U.S. containment and confrontation, especially amid the ongoing proxy war in Ukraine. People like to pretend this has no cost at all on Russia. It does, and it does place limitations on things that Russia could do, things that it would be doing if it was not tied up in Ukraine. While it is unlikely Russia can now match or exceed the capabilities enabled by SpaceX, Russia had previously surpassed the U.S. in terms of launch capabilities. At one point, shuttling U.S. astronauts to and from the International Space Station for years because of the inability of U.S. aerospace monopolies to develop a timely replacement for the space shuttle. I don't know if people remember that, but for years and years and years, the United States government paid Russia to send their astronauts up to the space station. After the space shuttle retired, they went years and years with no replacement, because the entrenched aerospace monopoly, they weren't interested in building anything timely and effective. And even to this day, they really don't have an alternative for the space shuttle. They now depend solely on SpaceX. Boeing was working on a Starliner, but you could just look into that and all the problems they have, because Boeing is Boeing, and Boeing wants profits more than anything else, more than they want a functioning spacecraft. And so that shows you that Russia, despite being smaller, despite having a smaller economy than the United States, their space launch capabilities were disproportionately greater because it was purpose-driven. And again, despite all of the disadvantages that they faced, they still had the ability to do that when even the US didn't. So think about that. Now, let's talk about China. China, on the other hand, has a larger economy, a vastly larger industrial base, more modern and extensive infrastructure, and millions more STEM graduates each year than the US. STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, mathematics. How many more STEM graduates than the US do they have, Brian? Millions more. This is the United States, 500,000. Here's China, almost 5 million. Look at Russia with a much smaller population than the US, almost the same number of STEM graduates as the US. That is a huge problem. That is a huge disadvantage. The US never even thinks about when talking about preventing China's rise or matching or surpassing China or stopping China from surpassing the United States. These are things that they don't seem to be adding into the equation. Together with purpose-driven state-owned enterprises and national policy promoting purpose-driven private business, China has already surpassed the United States across a number of fields and will almost certainly surpass US space launch capabilities in both quality and quantity, barring extreme preventive measures taken by the US. You can already see China lining up a number of space launch systems that have the potential to become reliably reusable, to match or exceed anything SpaceX has achieved, and they will do more. They will go beyond that. And their progress is not linear, it is exponential. They are catching up faster and faster and faster to the United States, and anything they still have an advantage in. And when I say barring extreme preemptive measures taken by the US is planning and preparing for a cataclysmic clash with China. They cannot accept China irreversibly surpassing the United States. They will do almost anything to stop this from happening, including some sort of conflict by proxy or even directly to try to cripple and set back China. So that's what I'm talking about. But if the US does not succeed in doing that, China will inevitably and completely surpass the US in all measures, by all metrics. A new space race, new rules. Let's talk about why reusability is where the new space race is rooted. And I know that people are talking about going back to the moon, going to Mars, but reusability is how all of that's going to happen on any sort of scale. And that is the revolution that is going to drive that. And whoever is able to do that the best is going to have the biggest advantage. Right now, the US has the biggest advantage. SpaceX's Elon Musk, in regards to the test launch of WW3, remarked that even if it is successful, by the time it reaches large-scale production and use, SpaceX's next-generation launch system, Starship, will have surpassed it. I don't know if you've ever seen Starship. It is the largest, most powerful rocket ever created. They are test launching Starship, that different iterations of its design, prototypes essentially, and they are test flying them. Suborbital, they haven't actually done an orbit around the Earth, but they're suborbital launches for all intents and purposes, going into space and coming back. And they plan to do orbital tests very soon. And it is a massive rocket, is a quantum leap ahead of even Falcon 9. And so, yes, China would have to do a lot of catching up. But just because it took years for China to catch up to the United States in terms of space launch capabilities before SpaceX pushed the US back into the lead, and now it has taken several more years for China to begin developing and testing its own reusable rockets, doesn't mean it'll take the same amount of time to match SpaceX's Starship, or that China won't be able to leapfrog US space launch capabilities altogether. As a matter of fact, China is already developing the Super Heavy Long March 9 and 10 launch systems meant to perform the same roles as SpaceX's Starship, with engine production and testing already ongoing. So they actually have hardware that they are testing, engines that they are igniting and testing that will go onto the Long March 9 and 10 launch systems. They will not be reusable like Starship, but they will be able to perform the same roles. And so you can already see how they're catching up, if not in reusability, but the capability Starship would provide. And then eventually, of course, they're going to catch up in terms of reusability to this. There's nothing that the United States has or represents that is inherently better than China. China has a larger population, better education, better infrastructure, larger industrial base. They will catch up and they will surpass the United States. It is inevitable. While the US has one purpose-driven space launch company, perhaps two, Blue Origin, if you believe anything Jeff Bezos says, China represents a vastly larger purpose-driven nation, not just companies, but an entire nation that is purpose-driven, with all of the ingredients necessary to not only rapidly match the US, but permanently surpass it. And again, that is what the US is attempting to prevent at all costs. And in overall military, economic, and industrial competition, the US is losing to China in virtually all regards. It is unlikely to maintain its advantage over China in terms of space launch capabilities, especially considering these capabilities were developed despite the primary characteristics of America's socioeconomic and political system, not because of it. So again, people in these think tanks in the United States say SpaceX reflects the American system, but actually it is an anomaly amid the US system. ULA represents the US system, and ULA cannot compete with China even today. Actually, they lost years ago, and it was only SpaceX that helped the US catch up and surpass China temporarily. Should China fail to catch up to the US for a variety of reasons, including ongoing US ambitions to encircle and contain China with chaos, conflict, and even proxy war, in the same manner it has done so to Russia, a large and dangerous advantage will be given to the United States, who has long since demonstrated an eager desire to fully exploit it economically and even militarily. The first thing Americans thought to do with Starlink is create Star Shield, which actually has nothing to do with shielding anyone. It has to do with enabling US military capabilities from Earth orbit, or to enhance them even. The lopsided access to space afforded by reusable launch systems means placing not only larger and more capable satellite constellations into orbit, it also means being able to target and remove the constellations of others from orbit. This includes the use of co-orbital satellites, sometimes called killer satellites or inspector satellites, able to approach the satellites of other nations. You can approach them, you can gather intelligence from them, you can disrupt their capabilities, you could physically destroy them using these co-orbital satellites. Nations like the US, with a high launch cadence, can quickly put up new, more advanced co-orbital satellites into orbit, or replace any losses from an adversary's co-orbital or anti-satellite capabilities. So let's just imagine a war broke out today between the United States and China. And both nations say, we're going to wipe out the other nation's orbital assets, their navigation satellites and these low Earth orbit communication networks that China is already building, just not on the scale of Starlink. And they start destroying them. Because of the launch cadence SpaceX affords the United States, they will be able to put up more systems capable of destroying Chinese satellites, and also more satellites to replace constellations damaged or destroyed by China's anti-satellite capabilities. Russia, China, the United States all have the ability to launch missiles and hit satellites in orbit. They have all demonstrated an ability to do this. They've already tested it, and it works. This represents a lopsided balance of power in orbit, creating a potentially lopsided balance of power back on Earth. Only time will tell whether or not China's ability to match the US in all matters on Earth can be extended over this new space race above it. And again, it seems almost inevitable that China will succeed in doing this. And by doing so, lock in a multipolar world, a balance of power between nations rather than the US imposing itself on all other nations. And the hope, I think, there is probably in Beijing, in Moscow, in other capitals around the world investing in multipolarism is that eventually the interest driven in the US by the perpetual pursuit of power and profit, they will collapse because they will no longer be able to pursue profit and power at everyone else's expense. The multipolar world will put an end to that, and they will just collapse, atrophy and collapse. And more purpose-driven interests will replace them in the US, and the US will seek to play a proportional role in the multipolar world alongside everyone else rather than imposing themselves on everyone else. I think that is the hope. And it's important to understand all of that going on up above us because it does definitely have an impact on everything we are doing down here on Earth. I hope that article was useful to you. If you thought it was useful and you would like to help,
Kofi, follow me.